Imagine for a moment that you are a teenager. According to our viewership analytics, some of you watching this won't have to imagine very hard, but some of you will have to really stretch your mind to remember what that time was like. Either way, put yourself in the shoes of an adolescent for a little while. You're anxious and uncomfortable in your body, desperately trying to juggle your responsibilities at school, your burgeoning sense of young adulthood, your social life, the looming specter of the future, and a dozen other things that might make you stress sweat through your hoodie. Somehow, in between the classes and extracurriculars, the standardized tests, and missed party invites, you found someone who wants to go out with you. You're not sure what they see in you, but they must see something. Several months into the relationship, you decide to try and take things to the next level. You wait for your parents to leave town. You pick out the perfect Netflix and chill material, dim the lights, and cozy up together on the couch. You go in for the kiss and, shockingly, it goes over well. Then, just when things are starting to heat up, something doesn't feel quite right. You feel an overwhelming pain wash over your body. There's a flash of blinding bright light that burns into your retinas, and everything goes black. When you finally wake up, your partner is gone. Only a grisly smear of dark blood remaining, staining the couch where they sat like some kind of gory chalk outline. Somehow you know they're gone. They're never coming back, and it is all your fault. It sounds like the opening scene of a horror film, but for one unfortunate young man known as SCP-213, it was all too real. SCP-213 was recovered by the SCP Foundation in Palo Alto, California after his arrest. The local police department brought him in on charges of homicide after he accidentally vaporized his girlfriend. There were undercover Foundation agents in the Palo Alto Police Department who, recognizing this case as evidence of an anomaly, made a report and were ordered to bring the boy in for containment. During the initial attempts to apprehend 213, he vaporized the agents as soon as they made physical contact with him. 4 agents were lost before 213 could be successfully brought into a Foundation facility, where his anomalous properties could be better studied. SCP-213 is able to sever the bonds between atoms in any solid matter he comes into physical contact with. During this process, there is a bright flash of light, and SCP-213 experiences extreme pain, often to the point of passing out. Like most sentient beings in containment, he is considered a Euclid-class SCP. SCP-213 was initially contained within a high-security cell in Site-77. The cell is surrounded by a 10-meter wide zone pumped full of gases that are corrosive to human skin. SCP-213 was informed of the nature of his containment. Outside of the containment unit, 2 armed guards were stationed with high-pressured hoses, pepper spray, and polymer web grenades in case of any escape. However, containment of 213 soon proved difficult, thanks to the nature of his seemingly uncontrollable ability. 213 made 7 escape attempts before one was eventually successful. He requested an interview with the researcher assigned to his case, knowing that when she entered his containment facility, the containment procedures would be temporarily disengaged. He vaporized the remaining containment measures and escaped from his holding cell. The head researcher attempted to grab him by the arm, but was promptly vaporized, dissolving into a pile of blood and tissue. 2 more agents who tried to block 213's path without touching him met similar fates. After making his way into the hall, 213 quickly became disoriented, his mind muddled from a mixture of pain, panic, and lack of familiarity with the layout of the facility. He was unable to find an exit and was cornered in the staff break room, the door barricaded with a chair where he was attempting to vaporize a portion of the floor. At this point, he was too exhausted to disintegrate any more matter and collapsed from exhaustion just as a group of agents broke down the door. He was, with a great deal of care and the use of a gurney to avoid any unnecessary physical contact, returned to his original containment cell. Several weeks later, SCP-213 breached containment again. However, this time, it was completely unintentional. Security camera footage from 3:15 a.m. on the day in question showed 213's bed and a portion of the floor vaporized in a flash of light, after which he fell through the opening in the floor and landed in the basement. This incident made it clear that 213 had far less control over his ability than previously believed. Rather than a purposely destructive entity, he was simply a kid who destroyed what he touched and could not do anything about it. If it could happen accidentally this time, when else could it happen? Could he potentially someday vaporize himself without meaning to? Following this containment breach and some time to recuperate from the injuries he sustained from his fall, 213 offered to be more cooperative with the research into his condition. He agreed to comply with a series of experiments as well as routine physical examinations, and whatever else it might take to unlock the secrets of the vaporization effect. Just like the Foundation, he wanted to know why he caused this destruction and how he could stop it from happening. During one of the agreed-upon physical examinations, the research team discovered something concerning. There were smooth nodules, growths of abnormal tissue on 213's back placed in the shape of a perfect square, with exactly 15 centimeters between each one. The nodules were determined not to be tumors or cancerous in any way. They did not seem to cause the subject any pain, and he could not remember how long they had been there. Perhaps they had been there his entire life. Nothing resembling the nodules or their precise placement could be found in any public medical records or research journals. It became clear that the strange spots on 213's back were likely somehow related to his anomalous ability. Medical personnel were assigned to monitor 213 in his containment and watch for any changes, and follow-up examinations were scheduled to keep an eye on the nodules and any other potential physical symptoms. A week after the discovery of the first 4 nodules, 213 was brought back into the examination room for a follow-up inspection. There was nothing new found on the subject's back, the original nodules remaining in their place and exhibiting no change in size or shape. However, upon inspection of his hands, the research team discovered 2 more nodules. When asked if he was experiencing any pain or discomfort as a result of these nodules, 213 insisted that he only felt some mild itching and irritation on the skin around them. A doctor pressed gently on one of the nodules with his fingertips, and it did not budge. With the appearance of these additional lumps on 213's hands, the research team opted to perform a biopsy on one of them and extract a sample. A local anesthetic was administered to 213's left hand, and the doctor attempted to slice into the surface of the nodule with a scalpel. As soon as the scalpel's blade came into contact with his skin, there was a sizzling sound, a blinding flash, and when the attending researchers had regained clear vision of the room, the scalpel had disappeared. SCP-213 insisted that he had not deliberately vaporized the scalpel and offered to try again. The second scalpel met the same fate as the first, as did the third and then a 4th scalpel. After the 5th scalpel disappeared, the testing was suspended for the day, and 213 was sent back to his containment chamber to rest for the next day's testing. From that day on, 213's demeanor changed. He was less enthusiastic about continuing to research his condition, complaining of a pervasive sense of exhaustion no matter how much he slept, ate, or hydrated. He complained of extreme pain in his back and stomach, which did not respond to treatment with physical therapy or painkillers. In spite of 213's newfound apathy, the research team was determined to persist. They had come this far in their quest to uncover the mysteries of SCP-213, and they were not about to let their subjects' discomfort and a few lost scalpels stop them now. The plan for another follow-up exam and a new attempt to perform a biopsy were cut short when 213 was spotted via security camera having a seizure in his containment cell. He was moved to intensive care and kept there for further observation. Over the course of the previous 48 hours, 10 more nodules had appeared on his back, each separated by a distance of 5 centimeters. The nodules formed no discernible pattern. Once stabilized, 213 was returned to his cell, where more medical personnel were stationed alongside the guards in order to monitor his condition and watch for any further seizures or other adverse effects. 1 week later, everything would change, and the true nature of SCP-213 would finally be revealed. 213 requested his next physical exam, claiming that he had noticed something wrong with him while taking a shower. While washing his back, he was shocked to find the skin suddenly smoothed and unblemished. The nodules had disappeared, seemingly overnight. However, he was more concerned than relieved. He could not shake the feeling that, even though he could not see it, something worse had replaced them. A cursory examination could not identify anything in place of the nodules. However, a closer inspection revealed that there was indeed something there. Where there had once been lumps of tissue, there were now thin cuts, like surgical incisions less than 1 millimeter in width. Guards rushed to the examination room where the sound of a terrified scream echoed through the halls. They found the medical examiner white as a sheet and trembling. While she had been examining the incisions on 213's skin, the one on his left palm had opened to reveal an eye. Though she could not explain how, she knew that the eye was watching her, that it could see what she was doing and wanted to understand it. 213 was permanently transferred to a medical wing of the facility and placed under constant observation. The appearance of this eye sparked a new hypothesis among the research team. SCP-213's anomalous properties are not his own. Indeed, his body is not his own either. Some sort of parasite is residing within him, watching his surroundings through eyes buried beneath the skin. It is vaporizing matter in an attempt to protect itself from harm, and possibly as a means of feeding itself. When the eye first appeared and the parasite hypothesis was introduced, SCP-213 began to panic. He begged the research team to remove the parasite from his body, to cut him open and extract it by any means necessary. They refused, and 213 had to be sedated in order to keep him from attacking any of the medical staff. Whatever is living inside of 213, it does not show up on medical scans. It cannot or will not communicate with the research team about its nature or what it might want. The more the medical team tests on it, the larger it seems to grow, with more and more tiny incisions appearing on 213's body through which the entity can look. SCP-213 had been placed in a medically induced coma until the parasitic entity can be better understood and perhaps even removed from his body. In the meantime, perhaps it is better for him and every living thing around him if he just stays asleep. At Site-19, many anomalies are kept secure. One, however, does not fit in with the rest. He is a Caucasian man of around 55 years of age, who at first glance seems normal in every way. He's average height, average weight, and dressed in business attire. Calling himself Gustav Noble, he seems to be a perfectly pleasant American man who seems to be deeply out of place compared to the hundreds of other objects and entities kept at the largest SCP containment facility. So why is he so closely guarded? What secrets are kept inside this man's head? To understand why SCP-657 is so important, one has to go back to his recovery. Mr. Noble worked for years as an undertaker at a funeral home in the United States, not raising any attention. But there was a man who worked for him, and they didn't get along. They argued frequently, and one day SCP-652 had to correct the man's work, something that he had to do frequently. They argued, and suddenly Mr. Noble got angry. He yelled out, "What does it matter? You'll be dead before the end of the week." There were multiple people present, and they all thought Mr. Noble must be losing his mind. That is, until it came true. 3 days later, the man was working on his home when he slipped and fell from his roof. He was killed instantly, in what would seem like a tragic accident. There was no evidence pointing to another cause of death, but many people remembered Mr. Noble's outburst at work and reported him to the authorities as a possible killer. That was enough for the police, and they arrested Mr. Noble. They were never able to find any physical evidence linking him to the case, but they questioned him relentlessly. While he never indicated that he was responsible, Mr. Noble did make similar comments about one of the arresting officers also being close to death. That man met his own end 2 days later, when a suspect fatally shot him during an apprehension. The two deaths seemed unrelated, but the police didn't believe it, and neither did the SCP Foundation. The police were convinced that this normal-looking man had somehow been involved in the officer's death, and they made a request for federal assistance as they investigated. While they didn't understand what had happened, they knew they wanted to see the man pay for his crimes. The justice system moved quickly, and Gustav Noble was put on trial for both murders. In near-record time, he was convicted of one murder and of conspiracy to commit the other, and he was sentenced to death. According to the officers who apprehended him, he would soon be facing the death chamber and justice would be done. But it was all a lie. The SCP Foundation is quite experienced with extracting prisoners. Condemned prisoners are one of their best sources for the recruiting of D-class personnel, and they know how to remove a prisoner from incarceration and leave the authorities no clue that anything went awry. They used those procedures to retrieve Mr. Noble before his date with the executioner. But unlike most inmates the Foundation plucks from death row, this one wasn't headed for D-class duty. The Foundation believed he was much more important than that. They knew that this man, who would soon be classified as SCP-657, had a unique link to death itself. Once secured at Site-19, SCP-657 was debriefed and investigated by Foundation officials, which is when they became aware of the full extent of his abilities. SCP-657 had the ability to predict the time of anyone's death, sometimes with terrifying accuracy. All it takes for him to make a prediction is for him to make physical contact with the person, which can be something as simple as shaking their hand. The prediction is involuntary. As soon as he makes contact, he gets the information about how much longer they have to live. He was able to predict the deaths of the 2 men he had made contact with down to the day, but when exposed to some D-class personnel who had already been slated for termination the next day, he was able to make predictions down to the minute. But there was one weak spot in SCP-657's predictions. The closer the person he makes contact with is to their moment of death, the more accurate he is. But that works in reverse as well. If he touches someone who is still far away from their time of death, his predictions get fuzzier. He can still predict the general time of death, but if it's a decade or more away, all he can see is the year with no more details. No matter how accurate the time he gives is, he never gets any other information, such as the cause of death. All he gets is a number inside his head, but while the details might be unclear, they are no less accurate, and every prediction SCP-657 has made about the time of death has been proven true. SCP-657's powers seem to work the same on every living person, although there are a few odd exceptions. When tested on a select few SCP agents and doctors, he claimed that his abilities came up empty. He simply couldn't see a time of death for them, and the investigations and testing proved he was telling the truth. This indicates that future investigations about these flukes should center not on SCP-657, but on the individuals who seem to be immune. So far though, no common link or explanation has been found between them other than the fact that they all work for the Foundation. What does stay consistent is the reaction people have to SCP-657. When encountering him, people will nearly always report that they find him strange, unpleasant, or creepy. They may be sensing his abilities, even if they're not aware of them. But when they're informed that he can predict the time of death, the unsettling feeling seems to escalate. When they don't know, they simply can't identify what causes them to have this disturbing feeling. Could this be a milder but similar effect to that caused by SCP-053? A small child who makes otherwise stable people feel compelled to act violently. Right now, the reaction people have to SCP-657 is not considered a source of concern, but the Foundation is keeping an eye on it. SCP-657 is an unusual specimen in other ways too, though, and that requires unusual protocols. SCP-657 is one of the lowest security residents at Site-19, with his living quarters being a large room with a queen-size bed and any reasonable amenities he requests. He's not considered a threat to escape and displays no hostility, so the main concern is keeping him healthy and stable for future testing. His nutritional needs are taken care of, with the staff providing him with daily meals and vitamins, along with medication for his arthritis. His quarters look closer to a hotel room than to a cell, and initially, he was able to move around Site-19 as he wished, as long as he was accompanied by a staff member of proper security. So why did this have to change? Nothing differed in SCP-657's behavior, and no attempts to escape or security breaches were made. However, what did become clear was that SCP-657 freely wandering around the facility was a danger, not to others, but to himself if he encountered the wrong being. This stems from an experiment where SCP-657 was introduced to SCP-076, better known as Abel, and he is one of the most volatile SCPs in Site-19. SCP-076 consists of 2 separate entities, a black cube of engraved stone and the human-like, heavily tattooed male figure that resides inside it. While Abel spends most of his time dormant in a death-like state, he occasionally awakens and seeks out the nearest human being, which he then seeks to kill unless he himself is terminated. When killed, he eventually reincarnates within the cube. SCP-076 is a puzzle to the Foundation, and they thought SCP-657 could help them answer it. SCP-657 was introduced to SCP-076-2, as the humanoid Abel is officially designated, under pretenses of having him join Mobile Task Force Omega-7, an experimental team consisting of some powerful but controllable SCPs. This was really a way to see if SCP-657 could answer any questions about SCP-076-2's lifespan. Given the being's supernatural nature and unique resurrection process, it's not a huge surprise that the answer was no. What was a surprise was how SCP-657 reacted. The process of determining someone's lifespan is usually quick and easy for SCP-657. The numbers will usually appear in his mind in just seconds. But when he touched SCP-076-2, things went very wrong. His eyes immediately rolled back into his head and he collapsed. There was no physical cause for this, but he fell into a coma and didn't wake up for over a week. After he woke up, he was examined for any lingering health issues and interviewed so the Foundation could learn what he experienced. It turned out the answer was that he experienced nothing. He had no memory of the events, or of even meeting SCP-076-2 at all. This indicates that either SCP-657's abilities won't work on anything that's not technically human, or that SCP-076-2 simply doesn't have a lifespan and will continue to reincarnate forever. It was clear that SCP-657 had an Achilles heel. Exposure to human-like but ultimately inhuman SCPs had the potential to mess with his abilities and create serious adverse side effects. While this time he had recovered in only a week, no one knew if the next time would cause lasting damage. It was determined that security measures needed to be increased. SCP-657 would be confined to his quarters, with 2 security staff members stationed outside his door at all times. As SCP-657 had no unusual or dangerous physical abilities, security is still minimal compared to other SCPs, and the Foundation has instructed the site to grant all reasonable requests for entertainment and furnishments to ensure his mental health stays stable. But there is one other thing the Foundation is still trying to avoid. The staff has been ordered to keep their distance from SCP-657 and avoid physical contact unless absolutely necessary. This is because accidental contact, giving SCP-657 access to the death information, could be stressful for both parties. The knowledge of someone's pending death has been shown to weigh heavy on SCP-657, as seen in his initial outburst against his employee, and not everyone wants to know how much time they have left. Minimal physical contact is the best way to preserve SCP-657's use to the SCP Foundation. So what are the long-term plans for SCP-657? There are still many unanswered questions about his ability. While he has now been prohibited from interacting with other non-human SCPs for his own safety, he could still be used by the Foundation to learn vital information about Foundation agents and the danger posed to them on upcoming missions. One question is, can the death date be altered with advanced knowledge? For instance, could an agent who is slated to die in 2 days on a mission be switched off that mission to change their death date? Or would this create a time paradox, potentially upsetting reality by trying to change it? These and many other experiments will likely be tried by the Foundation in the future, once a safe method for testing them is developed and approved. The research continues though, since the best chance the SCP Foundation has at answering the great mysteries of death may just rest in the unassuming older man in Site-19. Endless. That's a word you're likely to hear thrown around a lot at the SCP Foundation, like SCP-3008, known as the Infinite IKEA, Endless, or take the life of the tragically immortal Dr. Bright, who became one with SCP-963 and now is condemned to existing within it on some level forever, Endless. Or most pertinent of all for today's video, take SCP-087, a terrifying staircase full of tangible darkness and a frightening and unknowable entity. No matter how far down you go, it seems as though there's just another flight waiting for you. Endless. But really, is anything ever really endless? Or is endless just the word we use for something when we haven't found that sought-after end just yet? For those who travel far enough, there may be a limit to the infinite IKEA. Someday Dr. Bright's medallion one day might lay inert and lifeless, with no traces of his consciousness left. And for those who ventured down far enough, able to clench their teeth and get past the fear, you may someday find that even SCP-087 has a final flight. But what if this isn't just a hypothetical? What if this has already happened, but the truth was considered too dangerous or too horrifying to share? What's really at the bottom of SCP-087? Today we hope to find out. Let's just also hope that knowing doesn't end up being more of a burden than we'd expected. Before we head to the bottom of the endless staircase though, we must first return to SCP-087's file and refresh our memories on some of the crucial basics. After all, it's been quite some time since our last video on the subject. This Euclid-class anomaly is one of the most well-known and feared, partially thanks to classified information being leaked via a certain video game, probably coded by the Serpent's Hand. As we alluded to earlier, many know 087 as the Endless Staircase, based in an administrative building of a classified North American university campus. It's been behind a number of mysterious deaths and disappearances, and has left many of its escaping victims traumatized and in a state of permanent catatonia. Having to descend the staircase is just that terrifying. Equally infamous as the staircase itself are the 3 tests that the Foundation conducted into the staircase before deciding to just board up the door forever. In the first, a D-class that was once a member of the Foundation was forced to see just how many flights he could descend. Not long after first entering the staircase and beginning to make his way down, he heard the desperate and distressed pleas of a child. He kept descending but found he seemed to be getting no closer to the source of the distress. When he was deep enough, that's when he encountered SCP-087-1, a frightening, uncanny face with few discernible features. The sheer terror of encountering this entity was enough to send him running back to the top. The second test played out similarly, with a D-class being sent in with a number of powerful, sticky-backed lights that he was ordered to place against the walls as he descended. This was done in hopes of increasing visibility on the staircase. However, it proved to be unsuccessful, as the darkness in 087 is more of a tangible presence than the mere absence of light. It was able to smother out visibility regardless of a light's source of power. Once again, the D-class heard the crying and encountered the face, causing him to flee. And the third and penultimate test involved a D-class who got really unlucky. She traversed the staircase deeper than any of her predecessors, before eventually encountering the horrifying face of SCP-087-1. However, rather than running up and away from the entity, in a state of sheer panic, the D-class instead ran downwards, deeper and deeper into the staircase. The audio cut as the face continued in its pursuit, and the D-class was never seen again. Did you notice that we said penultimate and not final before that last one? That's because there's actually a highly classified 4th expedition into the SCP-087 staircase, but as you can see on the original file, the data is expunged. What could have happened in that study that led the Foundation to wipe it from the records? Did they discover the great secret behind SCP-087? A secret too horrible for mortal minds to bear? We're not just going to give you one answer today, we're going to give you 3. That's right. 3 different interpretations of the secret 4th expedition into SCP-087. Which is the real one? Well, you'll just have to see. After all, nothing is simple when it comes to SCP-087. Though our first potential option is the most simple of the 3. In this iteration of the experiment, a male D-class murderer was instructed to descend the staircase into the heart of SCP-087, with the Foundation hoping to find out what happened to D-9884, the female D-class who disappeared at the conclusion of the 3rd expedition. In a sense, this new D-class would discover the fate that most likely befell D-9884, but through first-hand experience rather than distant observation. Being directed by Dr. Erdio over walkie-talkie, the male D-class slowly got deeper into the anomaly, flight by flight. Predictably, he began to hear the intensely distressed crying of a small child around 200 meters below him.
and immediately felt a sense of paranoia and dread wash over his mind. Despite this, Dr. Erdio ordered him to keep going, descending deeper and deeper into the bowels of SCP-087. Over time, the sheer psychological exhaustion of SCP-087 was beginning to take its toll on the D-Class, leading him to taking a brief break in order to nap. However, he awoke with a violent start, seeing the horrific face of SCP-087-1 staring down at him. It felt like all his worst nightmares had come to life. In order to escape the monster, he began to flee further down into SCP-087. Much like D-9884 before him, it would be the last mistake he ever made. When he finally reached the very bottom of the 087 staircases, the D-Class realized he was trapped. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Suddenly, the face of SCP-087-1 was hovering over him, boring its gaze into him. As the D-Class directed his powerful flashlight at the creature, he saw that this time it was more than just a face. The entity had a whole body, 7 or 8 feet long, with that same ghostly white and death-like appearance. It reached out with huge clawed hands and grasped the D-Class. Before the audio and video feed cut out entirely, the last thing the attending researchers heard was the screaming from the hapless D-Class and the crunch of his bones within the creature's huge hands. But of course, that's just one of 3 possible insane discoveries at the very bottom of SCP-087. Let's turn our attention to the next one, and see if its answer to the SCP-087 riddle seems to satisfy all of our burning questions. Much like the previous iteration, a single male D-Class was sent into the clutches of SCP-087 in hopes of getting some answers on what happened to D-9884. Of course, he was given all the standard equipment, from a 75-watt flashlight to a defensive weapon to a healthy supply of water and nutrition bars, none of which would save him in the end. Like all the others, this D-Class descended down those accursed stairs, getting deeper and deeper. When he reached a certain point on the way down, he heard something, but not the crying of a child like all the others had reported. It was an adult woman's scream. Specifically, it was the scream of D-9884, exactly as the Foundation researchers had heard it over the audio feed in her last moments before disappearing. This was progress. The researchers instructed this male D-Class to go deeper, passing flight after flight until finally the SCP-087-1 face appeared. But again, something was different. Something was wrong. Now it looked more like the face of D-9884, just without her mouth and pupils. Had SCP-087-1 been stealing the faces of its prior victims? Had the previous face been stolen from a student who'd gone missing from the campus? These were all questions the male D-Class didn't have time to ponder, as he was too busy running for dear life. But he didn't get far. Despite having no history of such medical problems, the male D-Class suddenly experienced a seizure while attempting to escape, and collapsed. The last thing his video feed picked up before losing transmission was a pair of long, white arms emerging from the dark, crushing him inside of its huge hands, before dragging his enfolded corpse into the darkness. That's another chilling potential account of the possible 4th expedition into SCP-087, but we can't stop now. We still have one more tale of terror to share before this video is done. In the next and final iteration, 2 D-Classes, 1 male and 1 female, were sent down together in hopes of discovering what had happened to D-9884. And by the end, they would have their answer, but they certainly wouldn't like it. As the 2 of them descended, they saw the marks on the wall where the adhesive lights from Expedition 2 had been somehow torn off. But the deeper they descended, the more disturbing the things they found became. They discovered words clawed into the stone walls, each one revealing a piece of a more frightening puzzle the deeper down SCP-087 they traversed. They descended further, sustaining minor injuries from a foul-smelling and caustic substance left on some of the walls and floors around them. At some point along the journey, a light was dropped, and in the brief seconds of darkness, the female D-Class disappeared. The male D-Class was ordered to go deeper and deeper into the staircase until he finally began to hear the crying of a little girl. When he reached the 666th floor, he found a wooden door. with the word home scratched into it. He steeled himself and entered the room, but it wasn't a room at all. It was a field, shrouded in darkness with a distant tree. A little girl, the one who had been crying, was finally actually here. She told the D class that she'd always been here, and that her father had been trying to find her a body so she could go upstairs. But for that to happen, she'd have to be properly birthed first. That's when the male D-class noticed the two huge stone slabs just beyond the darkness. On one was the corpse of D-9884, hanged by her wrists with thick metal chains. Her abdomen had been fully cut open, as though a brutal C-section had been performed on her. And on the other stone was the female D-class who'd been accompanying him this whole time, strung up but still very much alive, seemingly the next potential vessel for the little girl's rebirth. But this didn't mean that the male D-class would be left out of the fun either. After all, the little girl's father would need a new body too, if he wanted to accompany his daughter upstairs. The father in question being SCP-087-1, which appeared in the room moments later and swooped in towards the male D-class. What followed was a battery of nightmarish sounds as the darkness expanded and consumed the field once more. Not long after this, the Foundation sealed off the entrance to SCP-087 forever, now knowing that it potentially contained multiple hostile entities intent on escaping into our world and causing further damage. Students in the area reported a number of frantic knocks coming from the door for a brief period after that, until the Foundation finally had it properly soundproofed, and the issues were seemingly over with, for now. So there you have it. 3 potential terrifying secrets at the bottom of SCP-087. Which do you think is the most likely? Let us know down in the comments. After all, when it comes to SCP-087, it seems you can always delve just a little bit deeper.
Working at the SCP Foundation can really get your appetite going. After spending a rough shift monitoring the acid levels in SCP-682's tank, or performing the rituals necessary to keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, sometimes you just need a quick snack to hold you over before you return to the old grind. Problem is, at the SCP Foundation, even the break room can be perilous. Dr. Dan is notorious for pilfering pudding cups from the communal fridge, and ever since the administrator himself stole your tuna sandwich, you just don't feel safe spending your lunch break on site anymore. But this presents its own series of issues. You only have an hour for lunch, and obviously you can't order in due to security issues. Also, if you're eating off-site, you have even less time to finish your lunch because the site you're currently stationed at is relatively remote. We're talking at least a half-hour round trip to actually get to somewhere, so you're gonna need your food fast. And when it comes to fast food, few eateries are as prolific as the Golden Arches, McDonald's. And just to clarify, this video is not sponsored. We're gonna tell you about a horrifying anomalous secret that this company really doesn't want you to know about. Let's not think about that just yet though. Your stomach is rumbling, and you need that quarter pounder so bad that even being trapped in the red reality with Dr. Scranton couldn't stop you from getting it. When you finally arrive, you buy your typical order. A quarter pounder with french fries, a coffee, and a McFlurry. You see Dr. Clef a few tables down enjoying a box of chicken nuggets and ketchup, but decide not to engage. As you sit and enjoy your meager little lunch, knowing you'll probably be coordinating the cleaning efforts of SCP-173's containment chamber by the end of the day, your eyes drift over to something even more unsettling. Happy, the current mascot for McDonald's Happy Meals. You can't help but shudder. You've seen some pretty horrific things on the job. Nightmarish things. You fear no monster, but that thing, it scares you. Those big, soulless eyes, the wide, gaping maw full of 2 white teeth. Its diabolical sneakers. No child should ever have to look at that. You can't help but wonder, whatever happened to Ronald McDonald, the hamburger-happy clown that shilled fast food to you throughout your childhood? What is he up to now? Well, we have an answer for you, but I'll warn you, you may not be quite as eager to suck down a Big Mac and a Diet Coke after hearing this. Ronald McDonald, first introduced as the company's mascot in 1963, had a pretty good run, before finally being largely phased out by the company in the mid-2010s for a greater focus on the nasty little box homunculus. You can thank John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and those goofballs dressed up as clowns back in 2016 for that. But like anyone who loses favor stateside, Ronald had a prosperous career ahead of him outside the country. Well, not the Ronald we know, at least. You see, in an undisclosed cattle farm in 2004, most likely in North America, a monster was born. A horrific abomination birthed from a cow, like many have theorized about SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness. But this nasty little creature wasn't a giant heart with a stinger and scorpion legs. In many ways, it appeared superficially humanoid, save for its stark white skin, its thick red lips, and its full head of bright, frizzy red hair. But that was only the start of the unnerving strangeness exhibited by this miracle child. It was born with white gloves and long, clownish shoes seemingly grafted to its feet. Fresh from birth, the creature was huge, with a disproportionately large head and wide, disgusting pores that seemed to perpetually leak fry oil. The creature was unresponsive to any kind of external stimuli, perhaps suggesting it was brain dead, and it remained completely dormant most of the time. While most people would have screamed, run away, or called the police, the farmers at this particular cattle farm decided to let it ride and see how this whole nightmarish affair played out. That sense of curiosity and patience would soon pay off for them financially. It didn't take long for the creature to grow. The bigger it got, the more it looked like a giant mutant version of McDonald's iconic mascot, Ronald McDonald. And this wasn't just a coincidence either. It turned out that this monster was somehow intrinsically linked to the McDonald's brand, because once a day, the creature would horrifically unhinge its jaw and begin to barf out a huge quantity of McDonald's food. And we're not talking about raw materials that are converted into McDonald's food. The creature, later dubbed SCP-5962, vomited out fully packaged McDonald's products. The owners of this clownish monster had just hit the lottery, so to speak. While the particulars of the deal are unclear, they somehow contacted a representative of the McDonald's Corporation based in China. In exchange for presumably a large sum of money, Chinese McDonald's operatives covertly entered the country and shepherded the now massive creature over to a McDonald's-owned warehouse in Beijing. By this point, it was around 4 meters tall and weighed over 5 tons. It was kept inside a cage and housed at some cost, but soon enough, the creature was paying for itself. As we mentioned before, the creature constantly secreted fry oil, which was siphoned off for use in preparing McDonald's food across the country. The huge quantity of packaged food that it vomited out every day was also shipped off to restaurants across the country, making the Chinese branch of McDonald's incredibly financially successful. They were able to make an almost complete profit on all of these foods and drinks, once transport costs were subtracted, of course. SCP-5962 had become McDonald's China's best-kept secret. But of course, no secret this sensational could stay under wraps forever, no matter how much people in the warehouse were paid or threatened for their silence. If your day job was siphoning grease off of a giant mutant clown for the purpose of preparing McDonald's food across the country, there'd be no way you wouldn't speak to somebody about it. Nobody knows whose loose lips sunk this incredibly profitable ship, but rumors began to spread around Beijing about a huge clown inside of a McDonald's packaging facility. That was when local field agents of the SCP Foundation finally took notice. 2 agents, Jonathan Zhang and George Nagasaw, were dispatched to perform an infiltration mission along with a team of backup personnel. They entered the warehouse, apprehending any employees they found. As they and their reinforcements reached the northern side of the facility, they found SCP-5962 with a heavy collar around its neck, chained to the ground like King Kong, as McDonald's employees wheeled away carts of packaged food. Neither of the attending agents were fans of McDonald's food, but even then, just seeing this horrible display was enough to make them feel nauseous. The creature was taken and contained by the SCP Foundation, who conducted a number of tests on it. They found that the monster had no real internal organs save for 27 interconnected stomachs. Genetically, they also found that the creature was far more cow than human. The same could sadly not be said for the food that SCP-5962 was vomiting out. Seriously, if you were already feeling a little queasy from all this, we need to warn you that this is the part where things get really vile. Let's talk about what the McDonald's food barfed up by SCP-5962 was actually made out of. As we mentioned earlier, the food exuded by the creature was genetically human, with DNA often matching that of people who are alive and in no way affected by this anomalous process. Tests have indicated that certain foods, condiments, and beverages correspond to more specific types of bodily tissue and liquid. For example, the bacon and fries were shown to be cartilage and ligaments. The bread turned out to be made from hair, nails, and skin. The coffee was liquefied fecal matter. The chicken nuggets were made from fingers, ovaries, and testes. Even the water was a mix of saline and sweat. And of course, the ice cream was comprised of pus, bone marrow, feces, and nasal mucus, depending on the flavor. You get the idea. We'll stop listing off examples before you lose your lunch, but rest assured, all of the food produced by SCP-5962 was made of human organic matter. When the SCP Foundation interviewed Mr. Chen, the manager of the facility where SCP-5962 was being held, before his amnestic treatment, he seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing. As far as he was concerned, the food still tasted exactly the same as regular McDonald's food, and it didn't appear to have any adverse health effects beyond what you could expect from regular non-anomalous fast food. It's actually less cruel and disturbing than the slaughterhouses where the meat is typically obtained. Mr. Chen also contested that SCP-5962 wasn't all that dangerous either. The only time it ever performed an offensive action was when an employee of the enemy fast food franchise, Burger King, entered its vicinity. The creature vomited a stream of hot coffee at the corporate interloper like a fire hose until he left, suggesting that it does have some kind of strange inherent loyalty to the McDonald's company. But still, other than this isolated incident, the creature has never even displayed sentience. It was a big, strange, clownish McDonald's food dispenser. When questioned about the origins of SCP-5962, Mr. Chen once again underplayed the strangeness of the situation, saying that he'd heard rumors the farm that sold him SCP-5962 had also sold other strange, anomalous creatures to eager buyers in the US. The farm, which we can only assume is situated right next to a radioactive waste dump, was also behind SCP-4158, also known as Big Charlie. This giant omnivorous and seemingly immortal mutant cow is believed to have been birthed from a non-anomalous cow sold to the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse. It looked hideous and seemed to suffer from a wide variety of health issues, leading to the employees at the slaughterhouse trying to put the creature out of its misery. However, no matter how hard they tried to kill the monster, it just wouldn't die. Its bones were pretty much indestructible, and no matter how much of its flesh was cut off, it just kept growing back, causing no ill effects to the creature itself. Eventually, the slaughterhouse workers tried cooking and eating the meat, leading to them discovering it tasted just as good as non-anomalous meat. Much like the Chinese McDonald's and SCP-5962, the workers had just hit the lottery with Big Charlie. As long as they kept feeding the monster, which ate everything from bricks to other non-anomalous cows, it provided a pretty much limitless supply of meat, giving them unprecedented economic prosperity. In other words, Big Charlie was a literal cash cow. Jeff Fine, the slaughterhouse director, even started worshipping Big Charlie as a kind of demigod by drinking his blood. He believed that Big Charlie was a savior, sent to lift them all out of their struggle and desperation. Sadly for them, the SCP Foundation sent them right back when Big Charlie escaped their slaughterhouse, and Foundation field agents found, secured, and contained it. It was a sad day for the Butcher's Block. So, what have we learned today? Whether you're in the US of A or the Chinese heartland, if you're chowing down on fast food, you really have no idea where it came from. I mean, we kind of knew that already, but for all we know, the food you're enjoying could have just been vomited up by a giant fat clown, or cut from the flesh of a mutated cow. Just think about that next time you're enjoying a burger. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We'll all probably still eat it.
You are attempting to access Terminal 7 at Site 119. By continuing, you are confirming that you have permission to access this file, have submitted your last will and testament to the SCP Foundation HR Department, have said goodbye to all of your family and loved ones, and consent to the probability of a swift, painful death. You are not currently under any threat, but continuing to access this file will change that. Please look into the screen to begin scan. Scan complete. Identity confirmed. Welcome back, Agent William Miller. You are now accessing file SCP-2744, Tattletale. Warning, the threat is approaching rapidly. You have a limited amount of time to review the contents of this file. Remember that this terminal has been permanently contained. Mobile Task Force members are aware of your location and on standby, but they will likely not be able to save you. It is only a matter of time now.
SCP-2774 is a bipedal humanoid creature with a height of 2 meters. Its face is covered with a torn white burlap cloth, with a large aluminum zipper across its mouth. Though its true name is unknown, it is to be referred to by codename Tattletale. The creature is extremely dangerous and hostile. It has been determined to target anyone who attempts to investigate it or learn the nature of its identity. It cannot be restrained or prevented from reaching its target. Once it has its sights set on you, you cannot hide, you cannot run. There is no escape. The entity is currently uncontained, but steps have been taken to limit its potential for damage. Only this terminal has complete read and edit access to the file. Once someone has linked with the terminal, all members of MTF Epsilon 99 are stationed at the entrance to the containment cell. The entity may not be discussed outside of the containment cell. If you speak about the Tattletale entity outside of this room, you will be immediately terminated. Once you have accessed this file, you are considered lost. Tattletale was first encountered in the Yurtik Nexus. The Nexus is an underground free port, where a number of anomalous entities live without fear of exposure. It's also a network of underground tunnels used for smuggling and other unsavory business. Following a series of unsolved murders and disappearances, the Global Occult Coalition reached out to the Foundation for help. A research team was deployed to investigate, consisting of Agent Jamie Green, Adam Smith, Sammy Radcliffe, Dr. Stephen House, and Agent William Miller. Agent Miller was outfitted with a body cam, which captured the following events. Miller met with the rest of the team in an underground house in the Yurtik Nexus. Inside, he found a blood-stained room thrown into chaos, items turned over and scattered across the room. There was an unidentified body found inside of the house. The deceased suffered from deep wounds across their chest that tore off skin and muscle, revealing the organs and broken bones beneath. Their face was riddled with large bite marks, and their nose was missing entirely. Though there were bits of flesh and blood all throughout the room, the nose was not found. While searching the room, Miller found a blood-spattered note with the words, "Help, workers," written along with a phone number. As the group continued to investigate, they suddenly heard something moving and scratching in the walls. Tension began to rise. Was the killer still in their midst? Did they need to act now before it had a chance to give them the same gruesome fate? Radcliffe shot at the wall and a rat crawled out. They were safe, for now. The body couldn't be identified and was classified as Entity Victim 12. The note recovered from the crime scene led the Foundation to an attempted human and non-human entity trafficking scheme. 8 missing persons and creatures were recovered from a warehouse and interviewed. This new chapter of the investigation left the team with more questions than answers, and after an anonymous tip, the task force reached out to an unnamed lizard man, believed to be a member of the mysterious Fae, who was reported to have helpful information. The lizard informed Agents Miller and Radcliffe that he had seen something troubling. He couldn't remember the specific details, but a monster had come to SCP-4000, an enchanted forest and the home of the Fae, and had spoken to someone the lizard man had once known. He followed them home, but found only a mangled corpse and a room drenched in blood. One detail stood out in particular. The lizard man said that his dead friend had been robbed of a name, left a nameless husk. Whatever had killed them, it had erased their very identity. Even the interviewee, who had once considered the victim a friend, could no longer remember who they were. This would be nightmarish for anyone, but especially a member of the Fae, as names hold a great deal of importance for them. When Agents Radcliffe and Miller returned from conducting their interviews, they were informed that 4 new anomalous murders had occurred in their absence. Each body had the same wounds, deep lacerations on the torso, and large chunks of the face bitten off. This was troubling enough, but even more concerning was a series of unauthorized changes to the Foundation's employee database, which occurred at the same time as the killings. 4 employee personnel files had been inexplicably deleted to match the 4 unidentified bodies that were found. There was reason to believe that these 4 new victims had all been Foundation personnel, but no one could remember their names, and no one recognized their faces. The remaining records confirm that there had been 7 members of the task force dispatched to handle these unsolved murders. 4 were gone, lost from the world and from collective memory. Now only 3 remained: Sammy Radcliffe, Stephen House, and William Miller. Miller and Radcliffe met to discuss this new development and realized that they were being hunted. Something new, they were investigating it, and it was taking out the research team one by one. 4 down, 3 to go. The remaining researchers were ordered to return to Site-119 for round-the-clock protection and surveillance. Stephen House ignored these orders and locked himself away in a safe house located within the Nexus. Radcliffe insisted that she and Miller follow their orders and leave House behind, but Miller refused. He would not leave a man behind, not after losing the rest of the team, even if he couldn't remember them. Miller made his way to the safe house and arrived to find the door already open. He entered the building, searching for his missing colleague. He called out, "Stephen?" and "Are you here?" But there was no response. His path wound between rows of shelves, down pitch-black narrow hallways that seemed to go on forever. Just when he thought Stephen might already be lost, he heard a loud crash coming from up ahead. He followed the sound down the hall, drawing his gun just in case. He turned to the left and saw another open door. Inside there was a small janitor's closet. A bucket was knocked over, and water had spilled all over the floor. As Miller scanned the room, his eyes fell on a limp body. It was Stephen House. Miller ran to his fallen colleague's side, crouching down to check his wounds. House's body was horribly damaged, with claw marks from his shoulder to his hip. There were puncture wounds across his hands and arms, and his leg was broken, twisted around until bone showed through the torn skin. Afraid of what he would find, Miller reached down to check the man's pulse, but a hand stopped him. Stephen House was still alive. He struggled to speak, saying, "I'm not useless. I swear I'm not." And then one chilling word: "Run." Behind Miller, something let out an inhuman screech. He spun around to see what made the sound and saw a creature lurching toward him. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but distinctly monstrous. A zipper across its face was unzipped to reveal teeth stained black and red with blood. The creature jumped on top of him, knocking him to the ground. He thrashed and fought back, trying to throw the monster off of him, but it sank its teeth into his exposed forearm with a sickening crunch. Fighting through the pain, Miller fired his gun with his other hand, hitting the creature in the neck. It screamed and recoiled, allowing Miller to climb back onto his feet and fire several more shots. The creature scuttled up the wall toward the ceiling, evading Miller's gunfire and advancing toward him. Miller took a step back, but slipped in the blood on the floor and fell onto his injured arm. Helpless, Miller watched as the entity dove down at him, snarling and ready to devour him. Before it reached him, the crack of a gunshot rang out. Miller looked up to see Agent Radcliffe holding a shotgun. She had come to save him. The two ran back into the hall, the entity close behind them, and took cover behind a large shelving unit. As the entity approached, hunting for them, they tried to determine what to do next. Miller was frozen in place, shaken from all he had seen. Radcliffe told him to run for the door. She stepped out from behind their cover and drew the attention of the entity. She fired several more shots at it, then turned to see if Miller had made it to safety. As Miller begged Radcliffe to run, her shotgun jammed. She had no time to escape, no way to defend herself. Her words before the monster descended on her were, "You're not supposed to let me die like this." With nothing else he could do, Miller ran. He ran as fast as he could, cradling his damaged arm. Listening to Radcliffe's screams turned to wet gurgles, and then silence. He made it out of the building, where a team of Foundation personnel were waiting to usher him to safety. He was taken back to Site-119 and placed under 24-hour surveillance. The entity he encountered was entered into the system. File complete. We hope it was worth it, Agent Miller. There isn't much time left. It's coming. You know that. Any minute now, it will creep up behind you, then sink its teeth into your skin, devouring your body and your name in one fatal blow. What is it? Is it simply a monster with an insatiable appetite for human lives? Perhaps it was once a human too, a murder victim left unseen and unsolved, that transformed into a creature intent on erasing others. Perhaps it was an idea made real by people's fear of it, and that is why it is so afraid of being known. If the puzzle is solved, if it is truly understood, perhaps the creature will simply cease to exist. There is screaming outside of the room, gunfire, pounding on the walls. Protection is wearing thin, so think, what was it? What is it? You only have a few moments left. What will you leave behind once it takes you? Maybe it was fear. All of the victims were running from something, hiding from an invisible demon. Pain, feelings of inadequacy, the sheer terror of the unknown. Everyone trying to run, to deny their nightmares and pretending that sleeping with the lights on would be enough. But it never is. The darkness always comes. Here it comes.
Congratulations, Agent Miller. You have officially completed the Tattletale simulation.
You were successful in acting under pressure, showing dedication to the mission and the cause, and valuing the lives of your colleagues over your own safety. Your results show high intelligence, problem-solving, and critical thinking skills. The test was administered by Agent Sammy Radcliffe, Agent Jamie Green, and Dr. Stephen House. Though your work was impressive, you have some areas for improvement. You did not follow protocol when engaging with the Tattletale entity, and you failed to prevent the simulated deaths of Radcliffe, Green, and House. Better luck next time. Still, you displayed admirable selflessness and devotion to the Foundation's mission of knowledge, information, and containment of anomalies. You have been approved for fieldwork going forward. Now is a good time to celebrate. Many others who were given this test were not so lucky. The past 50 subjects to complete this simulation failed under pressure and died of heart failure when the fear got the best of them. But not you. You have the makings of a truly great agent here at the SCP Foundation. We'll be in touch soon.
It has been said that 1 is the loneliest number that you will ever know. But at least the number 1 is a number that can actually be known. What could we possibly mean by that? We'll try to imagine a number that cannot possibly be known or quantified. A missing number, if you will. No, not that one. This is a number that you can never put into an equation or a formula, and it does not appear in the numerical sequence. You cannot count to it, add to, divide, or multiply by it, or even see it. And yet this number still somehow exists. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? After all, the mathematicians among you will understand that the numbers are not a force of nature. They aren't a metaphysical aspect of our reality like space or time. Numbers are a tool, in a way. A tool created by human beings. We use them to measure and calculate. Numbers help us make some sense of this crazy world that we all live in. Just ask your math teacher, and they'll tell you how important numbers are to human civilization. The point is, ancient mathematicians invented numbers, so how could a number ever be missing? What makes a number unknowable? Well, perhaps it's time you learned. Math class is in session, and today we're talking about SCP-033, also known by the appropriate nickname of the missing number. As you may have already gathered, the whole point of SCP-033 is that it can't fully be understood by the ordinary human mind. Even highly trained mathematicians, experts in the use of numbers, able to understand the most complex equations, are barely able to interpret the formula that results in this missing number. At present, it exists written down on an irregularly shaped piece of paper. This paper does not have any right angles, no parallel borders, and the length of each side is different from all others. The SCP Foundation keeps this paper stored securely, locked up at the minimum safe distance of 30 meters away from any computer or other electronic device. On the paper itself is the mathematical formula that equals SCP-033. As you can probably imagine, the formula is intensely complex. It is filled with mathematical symbols ranging from common ones that you would immediately recognize, to those that are way more sophisticated and would likely require a PhD to fully understand. And then there are parts of this unfathomable problem that would baffle even the world's most notable math geniuses. But all these symbols and numbers coalesce to equal a number that has somehow been missed by all of humanity throughout the entire history of our civilization. One noted mathematician by the name of Professor Hutchinson, who first observed the calculation of SCP-033, referred to the missing number as theta prime. Okay, so here we have a number that can barely be understood by the average person, created by a formula so complex that when written down it might as well be a page full of gibberish. Surely there couldn't be anything more to it than that, right? Wrong. You should know by now that the SCP Foundation doesn't concern themselves with the mundane, ordinary type of strange. They deal exclusively in the kind of strange that has anomalous origins and properties. In the case of SCP-033, the missing number is so complex that it practically breaks every and all rules of mathematics. In other words, Theta Prime cannot possibly remain fixed within our reality. The reason why the paper Theta Prime is written on has to have such unusual dimensions is due to the anomalous effect of the number. When written on ordinary paper, canvas, or any other similar surface or material, the missing number will begin to break down whatever it has been written on. It will literally erode and disintegrate anything on a molecular level. You might be forgiven for thinking you could get around that by typing out the equation for Theta Prime on a computer, but you would be wrong. This reaction even affects technology, burning out any and all devices someone attempts to digitally store SCP-033 on. And if written on literally anything else, well, then the missing number will fade, become obscured and unintelligible in a matter of seconds, unreadable to anyone. We've talked a lot about what SCP-033 does, mainly because we can't really show or tell you what it looks like. Well, unless you want your computer, phone, or tablet to break down and melt from the inside out. Like we mentioned earlier, Theta Prime cannot remain fixed in our reality, and it will fade away from any surface or destroy any devices used to display or calculate it. But the anomalous effects of the missing number do not stop there. SCP-033 also possesses the ability to leap from any safe material, like the paper of specific dimensions that it is written and stored on. That is why the safe containing the paper with the missing number equations written on it has to be kept a certain distance away from any electronic devices or other surfaces that can display Theta Prime. Should a material safely storing SCP-033 come into contact with anything unsafe, say a computer, then the missing number will pass on to the unsafe device, material, or surface and begin to destabilize its atomic structure. Any paper or electronic storage device within a 30-meter safe distance of SCP-033 risks becoming a victim of Theta Prime, almost as if the number itself is an infectious virus. Although the SCP Foundation's top researchers have tried their best to find one, there currently exists no safe way to store SCP-033 digitally. The Foundation has a number of projects that are still ongoing, looking into the best possible method to store the missing number electronically, without posing a risk to their computer systems. Additionally, the Foundation has long been conducting research of a different nature, trying to find some way of weaponizing SCP-033. It doesn't seem like a bad idea, right? After all, Theta Prime functions a lot like a computer virus when it comes into contact with machines. So why wouldn't they try to use it as a weapon? It is the goal of these projects that the Foundation will be able to use the missing number as a way to neutralize hostile machine SCPs. Any anomalies that they encounter that operate on logic-based systems, such as artificial intelligences, could in theory be susceptible to the destructive effects of SCP-033. Within the SCP archive file for the missing number is a classified article that details more about the discovery of SCP-033. Before going on to explore the results of the Foundation's testing with Theta Prime's use as a cyber weapon of sorts. First and foremost is a transcript from a debriefing with Professor Hutchison. If you were paying attention earlier, then you will remember that this is the same Professor Hutchison that first observed SCP-033. And as a noted mathematician, he has some invaluable inside knowledge on the nature of Theta Prime, as he calls it.
Every school child knows that 2 + 2 is 4. The solid mathematical certainty of numerical order and value is the basis for all logic-based systems. We know that after 2 comes 3 and after 3 comes 4. What this formula proves is that we missed a number somewhere. Imagine if all our technology was based on the belief that after 4 came 6. We simply didn't know or conceive of 5. That is, in essence, what this formula proves. We missed a number.
The professor then goes on to ponder why handcrafted vellum works the best for containing SCP-033. Vellum is essentially an older type of fine parchment that originally would have been made from the skin of a calf or other young animal. Professor Hutchinson seems to theorize that there are 2 ways this particular material is able to keep SCP-033 written on it.
1. The irregularity of the crafting process due to human error serves to eliminate any traces of regularity that would be found in a machine-created product. 2, the irregular borders seem to confuse it somehow, as if it gets locked up looking for a pattern to identify and use as an escape hatch. I'll tell you this though, I don't think it should be left on anything longer than a few days. It will find a pattern eventually.
Finally, Professor Hutchinson then goes on to talk about the anomalous effects of the missing number, specifically its ability to destroy materials or computers that it comes into contact with. Hutchinson posits a theory that Theta Prime does not actually destroy anything, but instead tries to integrate itself into a system or onto a page. But the system or page cannot cope with the missing number, and so breaks down. It is almost as if he thinks the number itself wants to be understood. It longs for humanity to understand it after having been missed for so very, very long. But Theta Prime is so utterly beyond our understanding that it has the potential to be devastating.
It's like trying to cram another book into a completely full bookshelf. If you get a hammer, you can get it in there, but the whole shelf bursts eventually. If it gets out into the internet, we will potentially experience a full IT infrastructure collapse within hours.
During one of their numerous tests with SCP-033, the Foundation's researchers wrote the various equations and formulae that equal Theta Prime on a standard piece of white copy paper, referred to as X1. Then they placed a second sheet, X2, just 30 centimeters away from X1. Within about a minute, the same mathematical symbols and formulae on X1 had started to appear on X2. After 160 seconds, the second page was full with the complex equation for the missing number. After around 5 minutes, both X1 and X2 began to appear slightly damp. However, Theta Prime and its related equations were still visible on the pages. After double that time, the first page X1 had begun to separate, dissolving partly into water and the rest into the pulp that had formed the paper itself. While it still kept the same standard shape and size, the formulae written on it had since become unreadable. X2 was still wet as well, but SCP-033 was still visible. After over 21 minutes had passed, X1 had been completely destroyed. The water component of it had evaporated, and the paper pulp had also disappeared. The second page, X2, soon followed the exact same process of being structurally broken down and unmade atom by atom, until there was nothing left. It becomes terrifying to think what might happen if you wrote the equations for the missing number on another human being. While their testing has yet to produce any tangible results, the Foundation staff always make sure they transfer the missing number onto a whiteboard or chalkboard whenever studying it. Upon doing so, researchers are instructed to incinerate the paper that SCP-033 was written on previously, preventing multiple instances of Theta Prime and hopefully stopping the number from spreading any further. Any researchers observing or experimenting with SCP-033 must do so within a safe distance, away from computers and other devices. Testing can only occur for a maximum of 42 minutes before the missing number will destroy the surface it is written on, or fade from view. While dangerous, volatile, and potentially hugely destructive if it ever fell into the wrong hands, Theta Prime is a strangely insightful SCP. Knowing there exists a missing number must be similar to how mathematicians felt about the introduction of variables. You will probably have seen these a lot in your algebra homework, find the value of x, and so on. Like SCP-033, that is also a number that cannot fully exist in our reality unless you figure out its value. It influences the calculations you have to make to find it, but it cannot be seen or understood fully at first. Perhaps there will come a day where we can store the missing number properly, but until then, we can only hope it never finds its way into our favorite notebook. Gamma would never forget the horrific sight of SCP-5967. On the surface, she kept her nerve, cool and collected, her finger ready to squeeze the trigger as her weapon stayed trained on the entity. But deep down, it turned her stomach. After all, how is someone meant to react when they see a thing like that? A mess of flesh and eyeballs towering above them, staring back through more retinas than any living creature has. She did not yet know it, but she'd still be seeing that disgusting pillar of musculature and eyes in her nightmares for months to come. And still, it wasn't even the worst part of the incursion. Far worse than seeing the 5-meter-tall eyeball totem, watching it blink its many lids at her, was witnessing what it had done to Alpha.
Only moments before, Gamma's commanding officer had been in control of this situation, leading Mobile Task Force Lambda 5 into the Meadowlands of East Rutherford, New Jersey. The mission should have been a simple smash and grab, the same old boring story their team had lived through countless times before. Pick up a high-value target, the leader of yet another cult practicing an anomalous religion, and bring him in for questioning. Gamma never could have expected that things would go this badly. The task force had arrived to discover Caesar Winters, the leader of a sect of Fifths operating in New Jersey. When Lambda 5 discovered him, Winters and his followers, locals who were all members of a group known as the Commune, were standing in a circle around an instance of SCP-5967. Standing at around 5 meters in height, SCP-5967s were piles comprised of mostly musculature and organs that resembled eyeballs, human eyeballs. Despite lacking a mouth, vocal cords, or any other conventional methods of speech, these pillars could still very much communicate verbally, although they had little to say besides spouting phrases and principles associated with the Fifthist ideology. Almost immediately, the plan to capture Winters had gone awry. It was almost like he expected the Foundation to arrive, like he knew they were coming. As the members of MTF Lambda 5 moved in, keeping Winters in their sights, the anomalous cult leader somehow turned the gaze of SCP-5967 onto Alpha. The team's field commander ordered Delta to open fire, taking out Caesar Winters in a single shot, but only for a moment. Another of the commune members kneeled over and began convulsing. A wound formed at the person's neck, and from it emerged Caesar Winters' face. It grew into a full-sized head, replacing that of the commune member, giving Winters a brand new body in moments. On Alpha's orders to stop Winters from hopping to more bodies, Gamma and the others in their team fired on the other cultists. Everyone was terminated. 15 seconds was all it took. Then they moved towards SCP-5967, and everything went wrong. The bodies started to convulse violently, as if some unseen hand was shaking them around like ragdolls. Gamma watched as they began to levitate, hoisted by their necks and floating towards the mobile task force. Not one of them knew what to do, keeping their rifles up and trained on the corpses. Each one folded in on itself, becoming compressed masses of muscle embedded with eyes. That was when the team lost Alpha. Something was happening to their leader. She had dropped her weapon and fallen to her knees. Immediately, Gamma moved in to help her commander, trying to pull her back to her feet, but Alpha was resisting, transfixed by SCP-5967. It's her. She is lost deep in the cosmos and is angry with us for not helping her find her way back. She will kill us all, lest we lie in our brains and see her for who she truly is. Gamma watched as her team leaders rushed towards the pillar of eyes and licked it. The floating orbs of flesh and eyes that had once been people suddenly hurtled towards the members of MTF Lambda 5 at high speed. Gamma dove clear at the vital moment, performing a tactical role and managing to narrowly avoid being struck. Beta wasn't so lucky. Ready to retaliate, Gamma raises a weapon to fire at the floating remains, only to hear Alpha ordering her to stop. She had stopped licking SCP-5967, but whatever influence had compromised the Mobile Task Force leader hadn't relinquished its hold over her. She grinned unnervingly as her eyes rolled back into her head. Don't you hear her voice? She is angry, but I can save you. I can save us. Let me show you, Alpha said, before charging at Gamma with her arms outstretched. In seconds before she could defend against her commanding officer, Gamma found herself pounced upon by Alpha. Grabbing a nearby rock, Alpha swung at her head and knocked Gamma's tactical helmet clean off. Pinning her down, possessed by some unknown anomalous entity, Alpha held open Gamma's eyelids and licked her eyeball. Gamma screamed in horror as Alpha looked up to the sky and yelled, "I can see you! I can see everything now!" The case of SCP-5967 is one of the stranger tales within the annals of the SCP Foundation's history. Their investigation that led to the discovery of these 5-foot-tall pillars of eyes and muscle originally began with a different intention. The commune had been making waves in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, the kind of waves that had caught the SCP Foundation's attention. The two leaders of this apparent cult were Salem Steros and Caesar Winters, both of whom seemed to be able to use SCP-5967s to take control of the local residents' minds. Anyone that they affected could be controlled remotely by either Steros or Winters, with a seemingly unlimited range and no known way of relinquishing their control over an affected person. Amnestic treatments, hypnotherapy, none of the Foundation's usual methods had worked. Undercover Foundation operatives working secretly within the Lyndhurst Police Department were the first to discover an instance of SCP-5967 right under their noses. Literally, the pillar of eyeballs seemed to have sprouted up right in the middle of the Lyndhurst Police Station. The Foundation sent in containment teams to secure the area and administer amnestics to witnesses. But just how were Steros and Winters causing these monstrous musculature monoliths to appear? Well, the pair operated a radio show together, known as the Reality Sync. The Foundation agents within Lyndhurst had been unable to track down exactly where they were broadcasting from. However, after the SCP-5967 instance appeared within the police station, the answer seemed to present itself. During the building's reconstruction, tapes of their radio show were recovered, seeming to suggest that the pair had been utilizing anomalous means to broadcast the reality sync from within the station itself, while keeping themselves concealed. The reality sync was a religious talk show, specifically focused on discussing elements of Fifithism with the audience and callers who phoned into Winters and Steros' hidden studio. What exactly is Fifithism? Well, there's no easy answer to that question, unfortunately. Other anomalous cults and religions at least have a core tenet or belief at their center. Sarkicism is the worship of disease and decay, while Mechanites from the Church of the Broken God venerate technology. The beliefs of the Fifth Church are a little more interchangeable, however. They don't really have any defined theology or religious practices. Fifithism is often more just a collection of recurring ideas and motifs, the number 5, stars, and the belief in an external cosmic god, often a malicious one. In fact, if there is a defining principle of Fifithism, it's that it's an anomalous way of thinking that it can't really be understood. Practitioners of Fifithism are concerned primarily with transcending reality as we perceive it. They are highly interested in entities and anomalies that can warp and shape reality, to the extent of even being fearful of such beings. A lot of Fifithists seek to not only spread their influence to others through any means necessary, including brainwashing, but also hope to transcend humanity to a higher plane of reality, the fifth dimension. There, in theory, a person would cease to be a human being, and wouldn't even really be akin to a god or powerful reality bender. Instead, they would become something more vague, a concept, unable to be fully defined or to exist in reality completely. Fifithists follow this goal, presumably with the intention of saving humankind from reality-warping anomalies, and they'll use any infectious brainwashing methods at their disposal to bring as many people as they can into their way of thinking. This brings us neatly back to Caesar Winters and Salem Steros' radio show, The Reality Sync. This was the communes, their particular sect of Fifithism's, way of spreading what they referred to as the truth. Based on the various fragmented cassette recordings of their show that the SCP Foundation were able to recover, both Steros and Winters believed in a many-armed goddess, referring to it as only she or her. They encouraged their listeners to pray to this entity and let her know that they were loyal to her. During one of their recovered broadcasts, the pair of Fifithists hosts were even able to prank call the SCP Foundation itself. One junior researcher Jones was contacted by the two men and ridiculed for his association with the SCP Foundation. But after a few jokes at junior researcher Jones's expense, Steros and Winters began to insidiously implant ideas of Fifithism in the researcher's head. They referred to this as giving Jones the truth, something they both intended to do for all of their listeners in order to save them. When asked what they really meant, Winters and Steros made vague allusions to the truth being an infinite knowledge that only she could bestow. Jones had no idea who she was meant to be.
"Our guiding light, our creator," Salem described, before adding, "the very thoughts that should be infiltrating your head right now."
It seemed that through this call, the two hosts had managed to successfully embed their Fifithist concepts into the mind of junior researcher Jones, and they weren't about to stop there. During another call on their show, Both hosts spoke with a Wallington, New Jersey resident named Wendy Ricefield, who was already a self-proclaimed fifthist. Steros and Winters talked Wendy through a ritual to learn the truth, involving her drawing sigils on the walls and floor of her home and lighting candles. The phone line picked up wet squelching noises coming from the other side, the splintering of wood, and Wendy screaming for help as she tried to run from her home, only for something to drag her back inside. Eventually, the Foundation made the executive decision to step in and deal with the situation in New Jersey directly. Steros and Winters' operation was getting out of hand. More and more people in the surrounding area were being brainwashed into believing in fifthist concepts and compelled to complete bizarre rituals. Sending a team in to apprehend the cult leaders, Foundation personnel discovered Salem Steros and numerous other members of the commune. They had gathered at an instance of SCP-5967 that had manifested in Wallington, the same place that Wendy Ricefield had been from. Steros and his fifthist followers were discovered holding hands and standing in a circle around the anomalous pillar of eyeballs, as well as approaching it and licking SCP-5967. The members of the commune were rounded up, and most were sent to be kept in isolation at Site 9. However, Salem Steros was brought to Site 83 for questioning. Junior researcher Umar Hadid conducted an interview as to the exact nature of the goddess Her that Steros and Winters often referred to, and the anomalous rituals the pair had been involved with. Salem was less than cooperative. He demanded to be set free in the interest of saving people by spreading the truth with Caesar. However, he did reveal some key information about Her. According to Steros' claims, she was a goddess actively meddling with reality and influencing human actions. He told Hadid that if he killed the junior researcher right there, it would be because she willed it. Sometime before, both Salem and his cult co-leader Caesar had been stargazing in the Meadowlands, a remote field in East Rutherford. That's when they had allegedly heard her voice and being told the truth. This reality-warping goddess was intending to return home, but that way was broken. So according to Steros, she needed their help. This was the reason he and Winters began creating instances of SCP-5967. The eyeball pillars apparently acted as beacons, like a GPS signal allowing Her to come back. The pair and the rest of the commune were attempting to prove their loyalty to Her, in the hopes that they would potentially be allowed to transcend reality in accordance with the fifthist principle. Salem Steros was remained into SCP Foundation custody and kept detained in a containment suite surrounded by 3 Scranton reality anchors. Shortly after, the members of MTF Lambda 5 were dispatched, heading to the location Steros had inadvertently revealed during his interrogation. Their mission was to arrest Caesar Winters, who remained at large after the leader of Lambda 5 was compromised. Eventually, Gamma was able to contact the Foundation, who sent a containment team as backup. They secured the surviving MTF operative along with the infected team leader, Alpha, and the instance of SCP-5967 on the scene. Gamma was offered medical treatment and presented with a Silver Lion badge for her efforts in the field, along with a 2-week vacation as a reward. That did little to stop the nightmares, though. She wasn't the same, and neither was Alpha. After 2 long weeks of psychological screening, and no further hostile or anomalous activity, Alpha was interviewed by junior researcher Hadid. During their discussion, Alpha, real name Cassandra Sandy Danofsky, described that she could still hear voices in her head, rambling about the truth, fifism, and eyeballs. Amnestic treatment wasn't helping. Suddenly, someone within the Foundation played a clip of Caesar Winters' voice over the facility speakers, taken from one of his and Steros' radio broadcasts. It triggered an instant paranoid reaction from Sandy, followed by her opening her mouth and revealing something growing inside. Another eyeball. Some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion or other form of brainwashing had affected her, and she began exhibiting anomalous behavior. "Tell me, Hadid, are you a fifthist now?" she asked the junior researcher. "Are you ready to see the truth?" Hadid rushed out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Pacing around the room, Sandy started drawing strange sigils of unknown origin on the floor and walls, lighting a candle through anomalous means. Then there came a bright flash of light as a 4-legged entity appeared and attacked Alpha. The two merged, causing her body to change until it was unrecognizable. Well, as human anyway. Standing in the interrogation room where Sandy had been standing was a contorted mass of flesh and muscle, with multiple eyeballs staring out from it. She had turned into another instance of SCP-5967. They all had. They were people. Steros and Winters had made beacons out of living people. A D-Class drag races through the testing zone, screaming at the top of his lungs and doing donuts. A mime who is also in the testing chamber stares with disapproval, tapping his foot impatiently. Did we mention that the car is made of spiders? Yeah, this one is going to be a weird one, folks. Stay tuned for one of the craziest SCP stories you've ever heard. Emily had always dreamed of taking a trip to Paris. When the opportunity actually came to visit the city, she was overjoyed. She spent her time exploring art museums, tasting the bread and cheese, and walking through the city streets, taking in the sights. One of her favorite things about Paris was all of the street performers. As she walked, nibbling on a pain au chocolat, she delighted in the antics of jugglers, tossing colorful balls into the air. She gasped at the feat of athleticism and grace demonstrated by acrobats and contortionists. She giggled at the absurd shows put on by puppeteers and dabbed tears from her eyes at the sound of beautiful songs played and sung by musicians. It became part of her daily routine. One night, as Emily was walking back to her hostel after a long, languid dinner, she found herself walking down a street she had not encountered before. There was no one around except for her. It was a lovely moment of peace, but it also struck her as a little bit eerie, and she wished for the familiar throngs of people. Up ahead, she spotted the silhouette of another person and let out a sigh of relief. As she got closer, she could make out the black and white striped shirt, the suspenders, the black beret, the white face makeup, rouged cheeks, and red lips. A mime. A real, classic French mime. She couldn't believe her luck. When he spotted Emily approaching, the mime began to start a performance. He began with a classic, The Invisible Box. He felt around the walls of the invisible box, looking out with exaggerated wide eyes and an open mouth. Emily clapped and reached into her bag for a little bit of money she could use to tip him. After all, he was putting on a performance just for her. He deserved it. She walked closer to the mime, looking for a place to put her tip. She didn't see one, so she held up her hand, offering the money directly to the mime. As he took notice of how close she was getting, the mime began shaking his head vigorously, eyes wide and insistent. She didn't understand that he was trying to warn her until it was too late. Dozens and dozens of spiders began to crawl over the mime's face, out from inside of his clothes, from his shoes, pouring out over the street, and crawling up onto Emily. She tried to brush them off, she tried to run away, but no matter how hard she tried, the spiders just kept coming. All she could do was scream. In an attempt to experience a little bit of live performance, Emily unwittingly came across SCP-3247. SCP-3247 is a humanoid entity standing at approximately 1.7 meters in height. It wears a striped shirt and suspenders similar to the garb of a stereotypical French mime, as well as what appears to be white makeup on its face and all other exposed skin. Though these aspects of its appearance seem as if they should be removable, the clothing and makeup are, in fact, parts of the entity's physiology and cannot be removed from its body. This is not the only unusual aspect of the entity's physical form. Though it looks corporeal and solid, the entity cannot touch or directly interact with any solid matter, with one particular exception. There is a colony of spiders living on and inside of SCP-3247. These spiders have officially been designated SCP-3247-A and are highly protective of SCP-3247. If anyone or anything attempts to approach SCP-3247 in a threatening manner, the spiders will swarm the potential threat. As any savvy, anomalous activity enthusiast might have already gathered, these are, of course, no ordinary spiders. Not only do they dwell on and in an intangible mime, but they have a peculiar response to witnessing a human being making specific gestures or pantomiming activities. When this occurs, the colony of spiders will form the shape of an object related to the gestures, which they will then hold for up to 3 hours, or until given additional stimuli that prompt a change in shape. While the spider colony is assembled into shape, they will be able to share some of the given object's functions in spite of being technically nothing more than a mass of well-coordinated arachnids. As for SCP-3247, it is either incapable of speech or unwilling to speak. Instead, it communicates with Foundation staff via silent miming. When it does, the spiders will frequently react to its gestures, becoming effectively living props. SCP-3247 does not seem to be especially thrilled with this, likely because miming is inherently a propless art form, and these spider-based props undermine its artistic vision. Otherwise, though, the presence of the spiders does not seem to bother SCP-3247. In order to better understand the nature of SCP-3247-A, Foundation staff conducted a series of tests. In each test, a D-Class was given a gesture to perform in the presence of SCP-3247. Then, the research staff would record the spider colony's response. During the first test, the research staff ordered D-11424 to attempt to get as close to SCP-3247 as possible. They did not, of course, warn him about the spiders. He entered the testing chamber and approached the Mime, who was pantomiming the act of climbing stairs. As the Mime pretended to ascend an invisible staircase and D-11424 grew closer, instances of SCP-3247-A emerged to take the shape of a staircase, much to the Mime's frustration. SCP-3247 stopped its performance, throwing up its hands in a gesture of defeat. The spiders turned their attention to D-11424 and began to swarm him, treating him as a potential threat. Panicking and unsure how to communicate with SCP-3247 while the spiders were overpowering him, D-11424 began to wave frantically at the Mime. The Mime simply shrugged, giving him a look that said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" At this point, Control intervened, instructing D-11424 to pantomime some kind of activity. Fortunately, before turning to a life of crime, D-11424 had spent several years in a professional improv troupe and was well acquainted with pantomime. His performing instincts kicked in, and he leapt into action. He put a hand to his ear as if listening to the ringing of a telephone. The spiders stopped their attack, responding immediately to his cue. They formed into the shape of a small table, with an old-fashioned rotary phone on top. The Mime rolled its eyes in disdain at the sight of this prop-based performance, but D-11424 was on a roll. He crossed to the phone, picked up the receiver, and held it to his ear. "Hello?" he asked out of habit. He wasn't expecting to hear a voice on the other line, but then he did. Or rather, he heard the approximation of a human voice, created by a swarm of anomalous spiders. It sounded a bit like a human voice sped up, high-pitched, and squeaky, speaking some sort of gibberish. Realizing that this was his moment to escape, D-11424 placed the phone back in place and promptly left the testing chamber. The spiders remained in the shape of the rotary phone and the table for the next 2 hours, at which point they disassembled and returned to their home on SCP-3247. After his surprisingly creative work in this first test, it was decided that D-11424 would be the designated test subject for all future testing with SCP-3247, provided that additional complications did not arise. Though he wasn't especially fond of spiders, D-11424 was more than happy to accept the assignment, not that he had much choice in the matter. Still, it was definitely a better deal than getting fed to SCP-682, and it was a nice excuse to use his improv skills again after a long retirement. During the second test, D-11424 knew what to expect from SCP-3247. For this test, he was told to pantomime playing tug-of-war with an invisible opponent and an invisible rope. Now that he knew his improvisational scene partner would be a colony of spiders, he was able to enter the testing chamber with confidence. Once inside, he began to pantomime, pulling on a rope, having that rope tugged away from him by a strong opponent, and struggling to pull back. The spiders reacted right away, arranging themselves into the shapes of a long rope, one side of which was in D-11424's hands, as well as a large humanoid, vaguely muscular in shape, that was holding the other side of the rope. The spiders gave the rope a sharp tug, causing D-11424 to lose his balance and fall over, the rope slipping out of his grasp. Aside from some injury to his pride, he was otherwise unharmed. During test number 3, D-11424 was instructed to enter the testing chamber and close his fist, while extending the thumb and index finger in a gesture colloquially known as finger guns. Sure enough, as soon as he assumed this position, the spiders assembled into the shape of a handgun. D11424 was then instructed to pick up the spider gun and squeeze the place where the trigger would be if it was a real gun and not, spiders. A loud cracking sound was heard when the D-class squeezed as a spider shot out of the barrel of the gun at high speed before smacking into the nearby wall, leaving a small hole in the surface. D11424 fired several more times, each shot firing an individual spider at a pace that attending researchers described as faster than a speeding bullet. After firing 6 rounds of spiders at the wall, D11424 was instructed to place the spider gun back on the ground. During test number 76, D11424 was ordered to hold his hands together and wiggle 4 fingers on each hand, effectively pantomiming a spider. The research team was curious to see what the spiders would do when presented with a shape that matched their usual unassembled form. SCP-3247, who generally did not react much to the experiments on its spiders, began shaking its head in mild disappointment as approximately 640 spiders emerged from its body, dividing themselves into groups of 8. Each group of 8 spiders then joined to form one large spider, leaving 8 spiders. These 8 then split into pairs, who joined together into one larger spider, and so on and so forth until there was one single giant spider made from the hundreds of smaller spiders. At this point, D11424 followed his heart, jumping onto the mega spider's back and riding it like a bull at the rodeo, as the spider bucked and ran back and forth across the room. According to official transcripts, D11424 yelled "Yee-haw" throughout this part of the test, until the head researcher ordered him to climb down from the spider and exit the room. He was reprimanded for his behavior and warned that if he acted without approval again, he would be taken off the project and reassigned to a much less enjoyable position as one of the designated eyes on SCP-173. D11424 immediately agreed to comply with future instructions. During test number 133, D11424 was sent into the testing chamber and told to shadowbox. He danced back and forth across the cell, doing his best Sylvester Stallone impression and throwing punches in the general direction of the spiders. In response, approximately 3,000 spiders poured out of SCP-3247, assembling into the shadowy shape of a boxer, and began to attack D11424. The mass of spiders conducted itself at the level of a professional boxer, dodging D11424's hits before coming back at him with a jab, cross, lead uppercut, and rear uppercut before he could defend himself. D11424 fell to the ground unconscious, and guards were forced to interrupt the test in order to remove him from the room and take him to the infirmary for medical treatment. After taking some time to recuperate, D11424 returned to testing with SCP-3247-A. He was instructed to mime steering a wheel, such as that of a car. Immediately, a number of spiders previously unseen during testing emerged from SCP-3247, arranging themselves into the shape of a sedan. D11424 was then commanded to climb inside of the spider car and see if he could start it. He refused, insisting, "I'm not getting in a spider car, are you nuts?" When pressed by Control to comply with orders, he made a rude hand gesture. I'll let you guess what that was. The spiders began to scramble to reassemble themselves in response to the changed gesture, prompting Control to stop the test early to spare the researchers' sensibilities. With strict guidelines to avoid inappropriate or violent gestures, D11424 was sent back into the testing chamber with instruction to try out a variety of animal-inspired gestures in rapid succession. He formed one hand into a fist and made a peace sign with the other hand, putting them together to make a snail. As he made his hand snail crawl through the air, the spiders crawled onto the floor and assembled into the shape of a snail in front of D11424. Though the spiders moved quickly, at their usual scuttling pace, once they formed into the snail, they slowed to a gradual creep. D11424 noted a shiny, slimy trail left behind on the floor as the spider snail moved. He was asked to consider touching it, but refused, simply stating, "Ew, no." Next, he took his hands and formed the shape of a wolf's head howling at the moon. The research staff were curious to see if the spiders would form a wolf's head or the animal's entire body. They got their answer as the spiders swarmed and shifted, forming the shape of a full-sized gray wolf. The wolf padded back and forth across the room before sitting down, lifting its head and emitting an audible howl that sounded almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Next, D11424 crossed his thumbs over each other, fluttering hands like a pair of wings. The spiders separated into smaller groups and came together to form butterflies similar in size to a monarch. These spider butterflies began to flap their wings and, much to D11424's surprise, they took flight and swirled through the air around him. The D-Class was so moved by the beautiful sight that he shed a single tear, which he promptly wiped away out of embarrassment. Control then prompted him to try the next animal gesture. D11424 used his hands to form the shape of a rabbit. Several of the spiders crawled away, returning to SCP-3247, and the remaining spiders took on the form of a rabbit. The spider rabbit hopped realistically around the room, twitching its ears and tail. At this point, D11424 was instructed to offer the spider rabbit a carrot. He produced a carrot from his pocket, holding it out in front of him. The spider rabbit hopped over to him and, one crunch at a time, began to eat the carrot until none remained. D11424 appeared shaken up and asked to leave the testing chamber. As he followed all of his instructions, this request was granted. When he exited the chamber, all he would say was, "Where the hell did the carrot go? It doesn't have a stomach, it doesn't have a mouth, where did it go?" SCP-3247 is kept in an isolated chamber located in the arachnid wing of Area 12. It does not appear to require food or rest, but it has been provided with a television and a collection of silent films for morale purposes. Instances of SCP-3247-A are fed via a fully automated system that dispenses 20 grams of live crickets every week. Should a containment breach occur, staff have been instructed to find a way to make escaped spiders take on the shape that renders them motionless, then simply pick the spider cluster up and place it back inside of the cell. It is unlikely that the Foundation will ever get an explanation for where the intangible Mime and his merry band of spider performers originated from. But one thing is clear, they won't be performing in public again anytime soon.
MTF agents scramble through the crowd of bloodthirsty, hypnotized festival goers. Up on the stage, a pair of living statues hold down a screaming man as they produce medieval instruments of torture from an antique case. Maybe this time the agents can stop it. Maybe they can prevent all the horror and bloodshed. But one thing stands in their way. A man-sized, cartoonish dove costume flying down towards them, wielding a large wooden mallet that would only bring death and destruction. Needless to say, even by Foundation standards, this one is going to be weird. When you found yourself sought out by the SCP Foundation's recruitment division and offered a role in the research department, they made sure to inform you of the risks. After all, a workplace injury in this line of work might be far more serious than slipping on a wet floor or developing carpal tunnel from typing all day. Working within the ranks of the Foundation, you could be the unfortunate victim of any number of dangerous anomalies, whether it's SCP-096 appearing behind you after you accidentally caught a glimpse of it as a single pixel in a photo, or if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time whenever SCP-682 next broke out, then chances are you'd be receiving an early redundancy and a closed casket service, if there's even enough of you left to bury. It is the one thing you never want to happen, the scenario you're constantly warned about from the moment you join the Foundation, a containment breach. Anything can be the cause of an anomaly breaking free of containment and spreading untold chaos in the process. Whether it's the result of a particularly cantankerous SCP that doesn't take kindly to being locked up, an act of earnest human error with disastrous consequences, or even international sabotage enacted by a group of interests trying to seize anomalies for their own purposes. There is no telling when or where a containment breach might occur, or is there? Despite all the resources at their disposal, specialized facilities spanning the globe, advanced technology, and a nearly inexhaustible supply of personnel to contain SCPs, the Foundation still manages to suffer catastrophic casualties as a result of containment breaches. But surely, if they're so well equipped, such breaches should be almost impossible, right? Well, yes. So what causes them? What if every containment breach, all the loss of life, the further spread of anomalies, and the destruction of Foundation property incurred was all caused by an SCP? Not a living entity, mind you, more some kind of latent anomalous phenomenon that triggers containment breaches without warning. The prevailing theory surrounding this phenomenon is even itself considered to be an SCP within its own right, referred to as SCP-001. Of course, as many of those well-versed in the history and practices of the SCP Foundation will already know, SCP-001 is a designation shared by a number of anomalies. Some are believed to actually exist, while others are speculated to just be falsified covers created to mask the real SCP-001. From beings such as the Gate Guardian and the Scarlet King, to the existence of God's blind spot and even the Foundation itself, each of these SCP-001s are nicknamed after the Foundation researcher who proposed them for the designation, and often considered to be some of the first, if not the very first anomalies ever encountered, or at least documented. In that regard, this SCP-001, Plague's proposal, could well be one of the very first latent anomalies to exist, explaining why so many SCPs were uncontained prior to the Foundation being established, and why even now, with all their resources, containment breaches are still a worryingly frequent occurrence. There are multiple anomalies that appear to have been directly affected by SCP-001, at least according to the research of one of the Foundation's directors, Director Legg. While he might be drawing conclusions and seeing patterns where there aren't any to speak of, Legg reasons that the circumstances of these specific recorded containment breaches seem to indicate that SCP-001 was at fault. The first of these incidences Director Legg focuses on in his research is also the one we'll be focusing on for the remainder of this video. It is designated as SCP-001-1. SCP-001-1 previously went under the designation of SCP-5770 and is an annual anomalous event that occurs in the Piazza della Signora in Florence, Italy. The event consists of an unscheduled festival that goes on for a period of 10 days, wherein anyone present within a 10-kilometer range of the affected area suffers a mind-altering effect that compels them to attend the festival. However, SCP-001-1 is not a well-documented, long-running festival of great cultural significance to the people of Florence. Neither is it an event that is widely advertised. Yet those who have experienced the psychic draw of this anomalous festival are driven to attendance. During the course of SCP-001-1, two anomalous entities that resemble the statues created by Michelangelo during the Renaissance will host a show where they take to the stage to judge people they deem to be sinners. This pair of statue creatures will call upon the audience and bring those they've designated sinners up onto the stage with them, and will then enact makeshift, grueling punishments. These have been noted to resemble the acts depicted in Dante Alighieri's Inferno. So if you ever need any further proof of how hellish these punishments are, we recommend asking an art expert. The moment that SCP-001-1 ceases and the festival comes to a close, any and all in attendance are subject to yet another form of anomalous mental alteration, and will proceed to instantly forget the event. Any of the horrific tortures performed on stage becomes unknown to those that directly witnessed it, leaving them unaware of anything that occurred only moments prior. So given the Foundation's extensive knowledge of this festival, its gruesome proceedings, and the effects it has on those in attendance, you might be forgiven for expecting them to have a fairly well-established method of keeping the event contained, presumably setting up a cordon to keep attendance out of the area, administering amnestics to any that might have been affected by SCP-001-1's anomalous mind-altering. But then, you remember SCP-001, the theory behind what could be the cause of containment breaches. As a result, the Foundation has still been unable to establish containment of the event formerly known as SCP-5770, and Director Legg's research has tied this issue with containment to SCP-001. Hence, the festival's redesignation to SCP-001-1. Following the initial discovery of an anomalous annual occurrence in the city of Florence in 1985, the SCP Foundation's head researcher, assigned to what was then known as SCP-5770, was one Joseph Pasqua, former site director at Site-322. Pasqua was, according to the incidents recorded on the Foundation's own database, somehow manipulated by one of the anomalous statue creatures that performed the show during occurrences of SCP-5770. It was thanks to the influence of this entity that Joseph Pasqua deserted his post at the Foundation and went into hiding. The fact that the influence of one of the performers of this festival was able to extend its influence to a senior member of the Foundation was not only troubling, but also constituted a containment breach. Pasqua would later be tracked down by Foundation agents operating in and around Italy.
He was discovered 30 years later after his desertion in Vatican City as a member of the Papal Conclave, a specially selected group of Catholic cardinals that are charged with electing a new pope. If the former site director was still being influenced by the statue creatures, it is highly likely that he spent the previous 3 decades climbing the ranks of the Catholic Church, potentially to install a new pope at the behest of the entities responsible for conducting the torture of the Florence Festival. Another recorded incident of a containment breach surrounding the event that seemed to lend credence to the existence of SCP-001, the anomalous cause of breaches, occurred the year following SCP-5770's discovery. In 1986, the Foundation was observing the proceedings of the festival as part of their ongoing investigation into its bizarre nature. On site were agents of Mobile Task Force Zeta-66, better known under their unit's codename of the Guardian Angels. During the festival, MTF Zeta-66 operatives noticed the presence of a previously unknown entity associated with the anomalous event. The Foundation was already aware of the pair of seemingly living Michelangelo sculptures, designating them as SCP-5770-1 and SCP-5770-2 respectively. This third entity, despite being given the designation of SCP-5770-3, had its own preferred identification for itself. The being referred to itself as God's Strongest Soldier and resembled a mascot costume of a dove. Approximately 2 meters tall, this creature's body was entirely hollow. There was nothing within the costume. The costume was its body. The responding agent of MTF Zeta-66, codenamed Zeta Turquoise, was the first to confront God's Strongest Soldier and was greeted with quite the opener.
Tweedly-dee, tweedly-da, God's strongest soldier is my name, getting rid of sin is my game.
Confused at the creature's demeanor and presence, Zeta Turquoise called in a report to command, stating that a large birdman was harassing random attendants of the festival. When Turquoise moved in to confront SCP-5770-3, the creature repeated its assertion that it was God's strongest soldier and that its aim was to get people into heaven. The agent requested that God's strongest soldier get out of his way. He had a job to do, but the bizarre birdman responded with more whimsical nonsense.
Burger, sandwich, fruit, and fries, you just told a big fat lie,
God's strongest soldier proclaimed.
Tweedly-deep-doo-da, deedly-deep-dop-da, pa-pa-da-pa-da-da.
Upon Zeta Turquoise's attempt to push past the creature, SCP-5770-3 produced an oversized wooden mallet, seemingly from out of thin air. It then wound its arms back and immediately, viciously, struck the MTF agent. A low-orbit Foundation satellite reported not long after that an object had been detected exiting the Earth's stratosphere. Analysis confirmed that it was, indeed, Zeta Turquoise. Yes, he was literally yeeted into Earth's orbit by a cartoonishly large wooden mallet. As for the entity known as God's Strongest Soldier, the bird-like creature then proceeded to attack the other members of Mobile Task Force Zeta-66 in a similar fashion, making sure they got to heaven in every sense of the phrase. With multiple recorded instances of containment breaches occurring in relation to the festival in Florence, and happening so frequently, more and more evidence of Director Legg's theory about SCP-001 was being validated. In 1988, the Foundation attempted a different, more pacifistic approach to containing the annual celebration by attempting to cordon off the entrance to the area of Florence where those compelled to attend the festival usually congregated. There was additionally a cover story issued to the public, stating that this was done as a quarantine measure to keep residents away from an area hosting a potentially dangerous infection. For a time, this seemed to be working. The streets were quiet, local residents seemed to be going about their business and paying little mind to the Foundation operatives in the area. That is, until the mind-altering effects of SCP-001-1 took hold. A mass of people, estimated to be over 100,000 Florentines, charged towards the cordon-off area. This mass of people swept through like a tidal wave breaking through a dam, causing Foundation personnel to be trampled alive. Those that survived the initial rush were attacked by civilians in what seemed to be a coordinated effort to reach the gatherings area for the festival. All Foundation agents in the area were terminated in short order, mercilessly slaughtered and then cannibalized before anything that remained of their bodies was dumped into the Arno River nearby. As well as being evidence of the sheer mental alteration the statue creatures and the festival itself were capable of. For Director Legg, this seemed to indicate something further. If an anomaly, SCP-001, was truly responsible for all containment breaches, allowing them to occur in spite of the measures taken to prevent such things happening, then the phenomenon seemed to be occurring specifically to prevent the Foundation from achieving containment of certain SCPs. Legge's theory developed with every passing breach that involved SCP-001-1. In theory, the festival should be an average Tuesday for Foundation staff, a relative walk in the park in order to contain it, if not outright stop it from happening at all. Yet despite all their resources, manpower, and expertise in all things anomalous, the Foundation had been thwarted at every turn. Despite how illogical such occurrences seemed, containment breaches were still occurring at an alarming rate, and perhaps none more so than in relation to SCP-001. The following year, 1989, brought with it the most inexplicable breach yet, and further proof for Director Legge's theory about SCP-001. While the previous breaches were undoubtedly anomalous in nature, each always carrying with the possibility that somehow, despite the low odds, the Foundation missed something. Some human error or previously undiscovered information about the festival could have led to Pasqua's alteration or the arrival of God's strongest soldier. But this time, it was undeniably that a force beyond the scope of the Foundation's understanding was altering reality to prevent them from containing the festival in Florence. An invisible barrier manifested at every entry point to the main area of the anomalous event. Whenever a member of Foundation personnel tried to get in on foot, those that attempted to access the festival area via rappelling out of helicopters instantly caught ablaze and burned to death the moment they touched down on the ground. Any helicopter transports also crashed on their return journey to Site 322, and God's strongest soldier was seen trampling on the wreckage before flapping its arms and flying away. It was following this incident that Legge was promoted to position of Site Director for Site 322 as a replacement for Joseph Pasqua, who was still missing at this time. The newly appointed director was yet to devise his theory that there existed an anomalous cause for all containment breaches. However, during his introductory briefing, he was presented with the file regarding SCP-5770 and the various examples of it not only being uncontainable, but being very good at not being contained. Director Legge asked if some of the more standard methods had been attempted. At this point, the Foundation had tried aerial bombardments of the festival, Scranton reality anchors to counteract whatever anomalous force was preventing containment, even using SCP-682 to clear the area. It had all failed. Figuring out why was now Director Legge's job. All the information of previously failed attempts to contain the festival led Legge to the conclusion that SCP-001 must exist, an unseen phenomenon, the missing piece of the puzzle, the element specifically interfering with the Foundation's efforts. He presented his proposal to the Overseer Council, who were skeptical, to say the least. They posited that the statues and bird mascot creature might be smarter than the latter's outwardly cartoonish nature portrayed. But this is exactly what, to Director Legge, indicated SCP-001 was responsible. He explained that all in attendance at SCP-5770's festival took the event seriously, but the appearance of God's strongest soldier was an abnormality, whose demeanor and tone were drastically different from the rest of the rather cutthroat proceedings. Director Legge explained that the sheer absurdity of this creature seemed to be the result of SCP-001 interfering with their operations. After all, if some other cause was to blame, like an unknown cult attacking Foundation personnel when they attempted to contain the festival, then there would be evidence of that, and Legge would have no reason to suspect that God's strongest soldier was anything more than just a tonally dissonant part of the festival. Of course, Director Legge couldn't prove the existence of SCP-001 based on the presence of one cartoonish bird mascot at a festival. But before long, more and more breaches would start occurring that seemed to further prove that Legge was onto something. There was something else at work, causing containment breaches that put the entirety of the Foundation in jeopardy. Ask anyone who has ever lived in a small town, and they'll most likely all tell you the same exact thing. The worst part isn't just being far away from the nearest city or distant from friends and family. It's the boredom that gets you. Having so little nearby gives you so few options for things to fill your time with. For some, they get used to it. As they grow old spending their life in the same tiny community, they either learn to make their own entertainment or just get used to the boredom, drowning it out by sitting and watching TV all day. But others, they just can't stand being bored, being stuck somewhere with nothing interesting to do, and ultimately, they can end up getting so sick of it that there's only one option: leave. pack their bags and hit the road, up sticks, and move to a new place far from the small town they were born in. Thing is, leaving isn't cheap. Moving to a new town, a big city, or even an entirely different state is a luxury that costs a pretty penny. Some might work and save their wages until they can realize that dream of moving away. But not everyone has that much patience. Some want to be free of the boredom as soon as they can. Maybe they might apply to be a contestant on a game show, chance it all, and try to win themselves a big cash prize. Sure, it's a hell of a gamble, and a loss might mean humiliation in front of everyone you know and more, but winning could be your ticket away from small-town living. That might be easier said than done, though. Not only does someone looking to move away need to be picked as a contestant, they also need to play by the rules and actually win the game. But as if that wasn't enough, they also have to live to tell about it. For as long as she could remember, Kat had always hated it here. Her hometown was tiny, too small to include more than the main street with few local stores, the one school that everyone who had ever lived there had studied at, and little else of note. And as for things people could do for fun in the town, well, as you can probably imagine, the options were severely limited, especially for a group of teenagers like Kat and her friends. Most of the time, all that she and the others, Leo, Ricky, and Danny, could do to pass the time was sit in the back of Ricky's truck and park in the middle of town, watching people and waiting for something even mildly interesting to happen. Not that it ever did. The four of them had a name for the rest of the townsfolk, everyone that had lived there for their entire lives and never dared to venture anywhere else. Lifers, as in they were imprisoned, serving a life sentence in this small town, never to escape or move on or make something of themselves. As much as they liked to poke fun at those people, each of the group knew that every weekend they wasted just sitting around, the closer they were getting to one day become lifers themselves. "We need to just go," Kat would say, trying to rally the other three into taking a spontaneous trip away as a group. "Just load up the truck one day, pick a direction, and drive until we find somewhere." Ricky and Leo would nod their heads in agreement, and Danny would talk for hours all about the places she might like to go to one day. But none of them ever actually made any plans to leave. Nobody knew where to start until they heard rumors about an abandoned TV studio just outside of town. Apparently, according to Danny's older brother, it had been there for years, just sitting there completely empty. It wasn't just a small local studio either. One of the big national networks had owned it and used to film there regularly back in the day. "Why would someone set up a studio here of all places?" had been Leo's immediate response. "Look at where we live," Kat replied. "It's the literal middle of nowhere. The network must have got the land dirt cheap. The real question is, why don't we go and check it out?" "What for?" Danny asked. Kat silently gestured at the cramped main street that surrounded them, the place that may as well have been the center of the known universe to the four teenage friends. "Do you see anything else to do around here?" Before long, the four of them were in agreement. Ricky's truck pulled up in front of their houses in the middle of the night, and under the cover of darkness, they drove out towards what was left of the TV studio. This was it. They were finally going somewhere beyond the choking, cramped confines of their tiny hometown. Although whether or not they'd all make it back was another matter. Here's a hard lesson for you kids. You can't fight for life you believe you deserve if you don't have a little skin in the game. With home a few miles in the rearview mirror, the truck stopped at a chain-link fence. A pair of signs were hanging from it, one welcoming them to the studio, while the other simultaneously warned them to keep out, that this area was private property. Ignoring it, the four of them stepped out of the truck and started to climb the fence, throwing Leo's jacket over the top to avoid injury. Beyond the fence was a huge building, almost the size of a warehouse, with a door marked "Studio Entrance" that practically invited the intrepid teens to open it up and have a look inside. Each one of them carrying a torch in hand, the group walked up to the abandoned studio and gently pried open the door, trying not to make too much noise. Even though they knew the whole place was abandoned, they still didn't want to attract too much attention and get caught trespassing. The lights were all dead as Kat led the group, her hand being tightly squeezed by Danny next to her, the two boys behind. None of them had been sure what to expect. It wasn't exactly like anyone in the group had ever set foot inside a TV studio before, but they were met with a narrow, concrete-walled corridor, so underwhelming that it almost made it extraordinary in just how profoundly dull it was. Lifting his torch, Leo pointed out some lettering on the wall that read, "To TMDG set," with an arrow pointing the 4 friends further down the corridor. Naturally driven by her curiosity and need to be literally anywhere apart from her hometown, Kat followed the arrow's direction to another door. Pushing it open, she stepped inside, her torchlight immediately being blocked by a thick curtain. Brushing her hand against the material, she started looking for a parting, but before she could...
"Welcome, contestants!"
A voice boomed through the dark, coming from somewhere in the space beyond the curtain. Instantly, Danny screamed at the sound, almost wrenching Kat's arm off in sheer surprise.
"Before we begin," the voice continued, "I need you all to tell me, are you ready?"
Kat shot a look back at Ricky, the friend furthest behind her, fumbling with the door they'd entered through. It was locked. He couldn't get it to budge. He turned and met Kat's gaze, shaking his head.
Sure, we're ready,"
Leo suddenly piped up, calling out to answer the voice. Before the rest of the group could turn and glare at him, the curtain around them lifted. So much bright light came pouring in that it practically dazed the 4 of them, each taking a moment to readjust. When her vision cleared, Kat saw they were standing in a huge soundstage, blinding spotlights pointing at her and her friends from somewhere above, with seating area big enough to seat their town's entire population.
"In that case, folks, you know what time it is,"
came the voice again, talking as if there was a live studio audience present, despite every chair being unoccupied.
"These 4 lucky challengers will go head-to-head, each one looking to take home the victory as well as a huge mystery prize. But only if they dare to take on the most dangerous game!"
There was a pause, as if this unseen announcer was waiting for a round of applause. Without warning, more lights came on, illuminating the space in front of the 4 very confused friends. Standing before them was what looked like part of an obstacle course, a series of 4 horizontal beams over an empty space. The glare of the light was so intense that even squinting, Kat couldn't tell what was beneath. It just looked like a void, nothing but total darkness, with 4 narrow beams bridging the gap between where they stood and another platform beyond.
"Well, what are you all standing around waiting for?"
the announcer declared, almost mocking the 4 teens, urging them on.
"Oh, the rules, of course."
There was another awkward pause, like the voice was waiting for laughter.
"It's simple. The 4 of you will be competing to make it through each of our obstacles. Make it to the end before our timer hits 0 and you'll be tonight's big winner. But fall behind or cheat, and it's out with you."
A huge digital countdown illuminated on one side of the soundstage, telling the group they only had 10 minutes to play. Kat, Leo, Danny, and Ricky barely had a chance to question what was going on, exchanging quick, concerned looks before the announcer started urgently counting them down.
3, 2, 1,
he cheered. Simultaneously, the 4 teenagers felt a presence looming behind them, like a figure was standing just out of view, blocking them from turning back. Carefully putting one foot in front of the other, Kat started shimmying along the beam in front of her, trying to keep herself steady while also moving as fast as she could without falling. Out of the corner of her eye, she could also see Danny on the beam next to her, doing the same, but finding it a little easier to balance. Leo was having no problem at all, sidestepping with enough speed to keep him practically neck and neck with Kat, but Ricky was wobbling. Every foot he placed on the beam, he felt like it might give way beneath him, but it was just a game show, right? Sure, it shouldn't even really be running right now, but regardless of why or how, the worst that could happen was that he would fall. His next step missed the beam entirely and Ricky could feel himself toppling. "Guys!" he called out to his friends, trying to shift his weight onto his back leg. Kat, Danny, and Leo all froze and snapped their heads back to look at him, just in time to see Ricky wildly flailing his arms. His whole body toppled to one side, and he dropped off the beam with a loud scream. Not one of them saw him land, or even heard it for that matter. It was as if Ricky had just been swallowed up whole by the dark void beneath them, his scream getting more and more distant until it couldn't be heard anymore.
"Oh, tough break. Talk about falling at the first hurdle,"
the voice exclaimed, as if what had just happened was some kind of joke.
"So long, Ricky. We hardly knew you."
Staying perfectly still, but clearly distressed, Danny called out Ricky's name. There was no answer. Kat just stared wide-eyed at the abyss below, only looking away as she heard Leo jump the last bit of his beam onto the platform. "Danny, come on!" Kat whispered to her friend, who looked back at her with tears streaming down her face. The pair of them carefully stepped further along their respective beams, trying to stop themselves from looking down or at the huge clock, seconds ticking away and putting them under even more undue pressure. Reaching the other side, Danny dropped to her knees, unable to hold back her sobbing. Kneeling down to comfort her, Kat looked up at the soundstage's bright lights for any sign of who was putting them through this. "Bring Ricky back!" she yelled. "I'm sorry," the announcer replied, the game show bravado dropping from their voice. "But you agreed to play." "He'll be fine," Leo said. "Bet you anything he just screamed like that to scare us." "Leo, you don't seriously believe that?" Kat asked as she helped Danny stand up, wiping her friend's tears away. "Is he dead?" she sobbed. I don't know," Kat replied honestly. "Of course he's not," Leo interjected. "It's a soundstage. It's not like this place is dangerous." "Then why was it abandoned?" Danny asked. Leo didn't give her an answer, either because he was distracted by the lights coming up on the next part of the obstacle course, or because he didn't know and wouldn't admit it. Ahead of them was a long stretch of the course, forming a narrow, square-shaped walkway. Wide portions of the top side were dropping to the bottom in regular intervals, separating the tight space before opening it up again. Every time the segments lifted up, the 3 remaining contestants could see all the way to the other side of the walkway, where a new platform waited for them. With Danny under one arm, Kat looked at the far end of the walkway as it disappeared and reappeared behind the rising and falling segments. Then she noticed the timer, the seconds rapidly ticking down. But Leo had noticed it too, and turned to look at the 2 girls with a determined expression. Kat shook her head at him, but it was too late. With all his strength, Leo shoved Danny and Kat, both of them landing flat on their backs on the platform. He bolted towards the walkway as fast as he could, managing to dodge between each portion, pausing as they came down, only to run into the next one as they lifted back up. Helping Danny back to her feet, Kat ran after Leo. He already had a head start and would easily make it to the other side of the walkway before the girls. So instead, Kat held Danny close and took it slow, methodically waiting for each segment to lift back up before they went further into the next safe zone. They were gaining on Leo, who was sprinting to the finish between the rise and fall of the ceiling's crushing weight. Kat watched him disappear behind each block, only to see his back when it came back up. He had made it to the platform opposite, panting but otherwise unscathed when she next lost sight of him. That's when the announcer spoke up again.
Now, Leo," it said. "That was hardly fair, was it? And we all know what happens when you break the rules."
As the segment in front of her and Danny rose again, Kat caught sight of Leo just ahead, but it was what was standing behind him that stopped her in her tracks. 2 huge figures, each like a shadow without anything casting it, towered over Leo. One of them reached forward and grabbed him, shrouding him in a cloak of darkness, and he was gone. Just like Ricky, he vanished. Kat had been so transfixed by what she had just witnessed that she didn't notice where she was standing, right under a block that was about to drop. Grabbing her hand again, Danny pulled her out of the path of the descending slab. Kat felt it brush against the back of her leg just as the pair of them made it out on the other end and onto the platform. The last 2 contestants.
"And then there were 2.
The announcer cheered, pausing again for a reaction from the empty room.
"We don't want to play this sick game anymore,"
Danny yelled.
"Well, you made it this far,"
the unseen host replied.
"Time for our 3rd and final challenge, the final stretch of the course. Make it through this and you're home free. But fail or break the rules like Leo, and you'll be disqualified. Game over."
"It's okay, Danny," Kat whispered. "Whatever's next, we'll get through it." "Do you think the boys will come back if we do?" her friend asked. Just like Leo had, Kat didn't answer. The lights revealed the last stretch of the course. The final platform was overhead, a net climbing wall in front of them. It was a straight vertical ascent up, with a wall behind the next and holes in its surface. Wasting no time, both Kat and Danny started climbing up the rungs of the thick rope, staying level with each other as they went higher.
"And then they're off. Look at them go, ladies and gentlemen,"
the announcer commented, still speaking as if to an audience.
"But it's not gonna be so easy."
The sharp sound of metal made both girls gasp as long spikes shot forward from the holes in the wall. The blades retracted, fortunately having missed Danny and Kat this time. What had started as a simple climb up had become something akin to a twisted game of whack-a-mole, with each of them trying to avoid staying in front of the holes in the wall for too long, dodging the spikes as they went in and out. They climbed higher and higher until…
Cat!
Danny screamed. She looked over her shoulder, only to notice she was in the lead. Below her, Danny was calling up to her with a fear-stricken expression. Her foot was caught in the rigging of the net, kicking and thrashing wildly to try and free it. Kat looked back up. She was almost at the platform, close enough to nearly reach it with her fingertips. But behind her, her friend was stuck, and with no idea when the spikes would come next shooting out of the wall. Kat threw herself over the edge of the platform and landed on her back, just as she heard the gut-wrenching sound of the spikes extending ring out. She was beside herself, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't uncommon for people to be overwhelmed to the point of tears at the end of a game show, but Kat wasn't crying with joy.
We have a winner!
The disembodied voice declared, barely audible to the surviving contestant as she wept. After she'd finished explaining what had happened to the police, a group of mysterious agents flocked to the soundstage to lock it down, stopping anyone else from getting close to it. They'd found a VHS tape in the mailbox at the front office of the studio. On it was a recording of a game show, a live audience cheering as one by one, Ricky, Leo, and Danny failed to complete the course. One of the SCP Foundation agents had come to interview Kat, asking her to recount the whole story all over again. Her account lined up perfectly with everything seen on the tape. Then the agent asked her what her prize had been after she won. "A car," Kat replied. "The four of us always wanted to leave home."
The dim emergency lights and alarms did little to deter Eddie as he swiped the keycard he had stolen. At that moment, it didn't matter to him if he got caught. He'd found them. The SCP Foundation. They were real. And now he could prove it. He wouldn't be a disgraced former investigative journalist anymore. No, this would make him a formerly disgraced investigative journalist. It might even win him a Pulitzer for exposing this shadowy organization to the world. He just had to grab some photos and escape before the security team managed to figure out where he was. He was in a small control room, emptied out since Eddie had tripped the emergency evacuation alarm. It was drab and gray, in keeping with the monotone aesthetic of the rest of the facility. Eddie's eyes were instinctively drawn towards a CCTV monitor, displaying the feed from a security camera trained on a corridor. It looked like it was nearby. In fact, Eddie could see the door out of this control room just at the furthest edge of the frame. Just as he was about to turn away, something caught his eye. He was certain he saw movement on the screen, right there, in the corner of his vision. Eddie looked back at it. Nothing. The image was still. Then he blinked and saw a body. Eddie bolted out of the control room and sprinted down the corridor, heading straight for the spot he'd seen on the camera feed. When he arrived, he froze. The area was empty. There was nothing there. He was certain he'd seen something on the monitor. A headless corpse sat in the corner directly in front of the security camera. Even under the faint emergency light, it was clear there was nothing there. Unconvinced, he held up his own camera, the flashbulb illuminating the area for a split second. He checked the photo. Still no body. But there was something else. The flash briefly illuminated something lurking down the adjacent corridor. On the camera's tiny screen, Eddie could barely make out its shape. Ice-cold sweat trickled down his neck as he steadied his trembling hands and aimed the camera again. The flash fired, lighting up the corridor almost all the way to the far end. It had only been lit for a second, but Eddie saw for himself there was nothing there. But the picture showed otherwise. Whatever down that corridor was getting further away, and despite his terror, Eddie felt compelled to go after it. It was the proof he'd been looking for, disregarding that whatever it was might kill him. Taking cautious steps, with each firing of the flash he'd seen a shadowy shape, some nightmarish creature that wasn't in front of him, but appeared in the photos. And with every picture, the terror and tension he felt got worse. Suddenly, a noise, footsteps coming towards him from out of the dark corridor. Eddie felt panic drenching him like a splash of freezing water. There were too many steps for a creature with two legs. It was coming after him. The thing in the photos had realized he was following it, and when it caught him… A few minutes later, Foundation personnel recovered an intruder, disgraced former investigative journalist Edward Bamford, who had broken into a containment facility housing an anomalous object.
Bamford was found cowering in a corridor, covered in blood, trembling and unresponsive. Believed to be traumatized, he was staring at his camera. The bodies of 3 Foundation security officers lay nearby. Bamford had seemingly killed them with his bare hands in a fit of violent hysterics. Foundation personnel were instructed to deal with Bamford the same way as others affected by SCP-895. Team 1 was cleared to move in and capture the anomaly. All civilians, the ones who were still alive at least, had been detained and evacuated from the area around the mortuary. Command gave the word over their comms, instructing the team to move in. They filed into the lobby, the crunch of shattered glass under their steel-toed combat boots echoing in the hollow space. Team 1 moved in tight formation, falling in behind their commanding officer, T1 lead. Weapons were raised, safeties already off, ready for anything. The first room of the mortuary, the lobby, had been ransacked. What had once been the calming, if melancholic entrance to the funeral home almost looked like it had been hit by an explosion. The doors were hanging off their hinges, windows smashed, the glass strewn about the floor. Plants that once softened the morbid atmosphere of the mortuary now lay strewn across the carpet, their soil spilled in messy piles. Broken shards of their pots were scattered everywhere, evidence of the violent rage that had hurled them across the room. Some of the bigger fragments were stained red with streaks of blood, as though used as makeshift weapons. Needless to say, something far worse than the typical macabre business of a morgue had happened here. The team continued through the mortuary, performing a careful sweep of each room. It was hard to tell the difference between the corpses that should have been still resting in their caskets and the fresh ones strewn about each room. There had been 2 services running when the incident broke out. 2 separate groups of civilians suddenly turning into wild animals and attacking each other. Their deceased loved ones were tipped over, tumbling out of their coffins onto the floor as distant relatives began lashing out at each other, some violently bludgeoning the closest person with whatever objects they could find. Command radioed in, having been monitoring the live feeds from Team 1's body cameras, observing the carnage left in the aftermath of the anomalous incident. There looked to be blood on the walls, a lot of blood, streaking up almost every surface in every room, reaching all the way up to splatter the ceilings. It was almost too much. It felt incongruent with the acts of physical violence that seemed to have taken place. Command contacted T1 lead, asking them to confirm the presence of the blood on the walls, but Team 1 couldn't see any at all. As they made their way through the mortuary, beyond the fact that the place had been trashed, there was nothing out of the ordinary, given that their body cam feeds were clearly showing otherwise. Command quickly put together what was likely going on. They warned Team 1 to proceed with caution, suspecting mimetic properties might be at play in the area. Sure enough, as the recovery team advanced towards the back of the funeral home, the blood on the walls seemed to vanish from their screens, fading with each step closer to the storage area. Opening the door and filing inside, the team found a dingy back room. The rest of the building had been lit with warm light to provide mourning families with a sense of comfort as they said farewell to their loved ones. Back here, only the dull, clinical flicker of fluorescent filaments blinked overhead, casting a cold light over the object the team was looking for. Unsurprisingly, given their current setting, it was a coffin. Little besides its ornate oak wood set it apart from any of the others within the mortuary. But watching the body cam feeds, Command were certain that they saw the object moving, as if it was alive. Team 1 couldn't see any movement. The coffin appeared to be normal. At T1 leads' command, T2 moved forward to open the wooden box, while the rest of the team readied their weapons. With a creak of its hinges, the coffin lid opened. It was empty. Not one of the team flinched, keeping their guns trained on the vacant space inside. They hadn't known exactly what to expect. 2 of them had even held a bet that the anomalous coffin would contain a vampire, with one now expected to fork over his promised $50. T1 lead radioed back to command, confirming that the coffin was definitively empty. But instead of an order to secure the object and return it to the Foundation, over the comms came the sound of screaming and retching. Back at command, chaos had broken out. The same thing that had happened to the civilians in the mortuary was happening to them. Frantically, T1 lead ordered the coffin to be closed and commanded the rest of the team to retreat. When the SCP Foundation received a tip about unusual surveillance footage that had been captured at redacted mortuary, it certainly raised a few questions. The first being, why would a mortuary have security surveillance equipment installed? While combing through the records from redacted mortuary, the Foundation's data recovery team discovered that a recent spat of local vandalism had led the owners to install a network of security cameras. The system was designed to monitor the property after hours and capture any incidents in case of a tripped alarm during the night. These cameras provided coverage of the reception, the arranging room, and chapel areas, as well as a private office within the building. However, out of respect, no cameras were installed in rooms where families viewed the deceased. The footage was recorded onto a hard drive, which was then collected and reviewed by the SCP Foundation. It mostly consisted of visitors to the mortuary coming in or out of the reception, showing the manager completing paperwork in the office, and so on. Of course, the other important questions were, where did the anomalous coffin come from? There was no indication in the surveillance footage of exactly when the object arrived at the property, or if it was constructed on site. What is known, however, is that several Foundation video analysts reviewing the footage reported seeing abnormalities in the recordings. These seem to differ from person to person, with one stating that, at a certain point in the video footage, the walls of the mortuary seemed to be covered with the words "Get out," written over and over in what looked to be blood. Another analyst refuted this, saying they had seen several dead human bodies lying on the floor of the reception in the footage. However, none of the people seen in the recordings seem aware of the presence of these corpses. Both analysts were submitted for evaluation and screened for evidence of psychosis. SCP-895 is, at least, when viewed with the naked eye, little more than an ornate oak coffin. Upon its discovery, several mortuary staff who had survived the strange incident of extreme violence were captured and questioned by SCP Foundation personnel. None of them were able to determine where the anomalous object had come from. Most of their responses indicated that it had been stored at the mortuary for some time, with no prior incidents until some time after the security cameras had been installed at the property. Functionally, SCP-895 is a mimetic anomaly. Its anomalous properties only appear to affect any person who views or monitors the coffin remotely. This means that when interacting with it physically, SCP-895 remains non-anomalous. SCP-895 is believed to possess mimetic properties that, through unknown means, severely disrupt photographic and video surveillance equipment. This effect extends to handheld recording devices, including smartphone cameras and various commercially available digital cameras and camcorders. It remains unclear if SCP-895's mimetic effect also extends to audio recording equipment, such as microphones. However, in the interest of safety, these are also to be kept away from SCP-895. What is known for certain is that any recording device or any photos or video captured within 50 meters of SCP-895 will be affected by its disruptive properties. There remains some debate among the SCP Foundation's anomalous researchers as to the designation of SCP-895. Some simply believe that the coffin itself is the anomaly, and the source of the latent disruptive effect it has on cameras. Some researchers argue that SCP-895 itself may not be the source of the effect, but rather a manifestation of a mimetic phenomenon. This disruption has so far only been observed in the vicinity of the coffin recovered by the Foundation. As a result, many who subscribe to this school of thought have taken to referring to SCP-895 not as an anomalous coffin, but as an intangible mimetic anomaly, simply referred to as camera disruption. The severity of SCP-895's effects were observed directly by the Foundation upon its discovery. The mimetic disruption of SCP-895 affected the video being received from command by the recovery team's body-mounted cameras. Following the incident, the Foundation had witnessed firsthand that the anomaly did not only affect pre-recorded footage taken within a set radius of the coffin, but was also capable of disrupting video feeds broadcasted live as well. The disruption itself manifests as abnormalities within the video, creating vivid and often deeply disturbing hallucinations to those viewing any footage captured within the vicinity of SCP-895. In the case of the recovery incident, Foundation personnel reported seeing blood on the walls within redacted mortuary, as well as believing the coffin itself to be alive and moving. Any differentiations in these hallucinations were not recorded, though it's possible other staff overseeing the recovery mission from the command center experienced different but graphic imagery. None of the personnel viewing the live body cam feed from Recovery Team 1 were able to describe their hallucinations, as the command center quickly descended into violent hysteria. The intensity of the hallucinations by camera disruption seems to increase at a rate that corresponds to the camera recording device's proximity to the anomalous coffin. The closer one gets, the worse the effects. Within a radius of 5 meters, any footage captured can not only trigger more disturbed hallucinations, but will inevitably result in severe psychological trauma in the viewer. This referred to as SCP-895's red zone, given the danger it presents. While individuals standing near the coffin are not directly affected by the hallucinations, any live or recorded footage observed from this proximity can induce severe psychological trauma and distress. During the recovery incident, the effects of this trauma on the command center were so severe that the damage done to personnel was irreversible. Those who survived were screened and given full assessments by anomalous psychiatric experts. The members of staff who were still responsive remained unaware that they had snapped and murdered their fellow co-workers in the command center. Others remained too manic to provide any responses. In the wake of another incident, which resulted in the deaths of 3 members of personnel, the red zone surrounding SCP-895 was extended from 5 meters to 10. In order to prevent incidents like this in the future, the SCP Foundation has since deemed it necessary to remove any member of personnel affected by SCP-895 from the site it is held at. Should the severity of their symptoms warrant it, termination of these individuals has been authorized. SCP-895 has been relocated to a sealed, isolated underground containment cell, situated at approximately 100 meters below ground level. Here, no one can observe it through the use of cameras or microphones, as no surveillance equipment of any kind is to be brought within the red zone radius of SCP-895. This may only be done with the express permission of at least 2 members of Level 3 personnel. Given that the mimetic effects of SCP-895 are dependent on distance, a security camera has been installed at a corridor junction, located at a 30-meter distance from the object's containment cell. SCP Foundation researchers continue to study the effects of the object by viewing this footage in rotating shifts to limit exposure. Security personnel are also to follow the same precaution, alternating every 4 hours to lessen the potential psychological impact of camera disruption. Recorded hallucinations appearing on this feed have included the following: the words "Get Out" written in blood on the corridor walls, an unidentified headless body slumped in a chair in the corner of the junction. The missing head lay a few feet away, at the end of a dark, smeared trail of blood. The floor of the junction opening up to reveal a deep red light that fills the surrounding area. The coffin itself standing in the junction, as if the object has somehow moved freely out of containment, and 5 unidentified bodies hanging from the ceiling, with only their legs in frame.
Agent Friedrichsen stared at the edge in disbelief, uncertain what the nodding, twisting feeling playing havoc with his stomach was. Awe, admiration, abject terror. Maybe it was just run-of-the-mill confusion as to how something like this could even exist. Sure, the world as he knew it was far more expansive than anyone knew, unless they also happened to work for the Foundation. But even with the wealth of anomalies running around, the Earth was still ultimately finite. Not just its resources, but its space, its contents, all the people and places and terrifying monsters that could fit onto one planet had a limit. There'd be a stop to it, a maximum capacity, an edge to the world. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you. Dr. Mann's voice should have startled Friedrichsen, the way it cut through the contemplative silence. But despite his ominous words, it was just nice to hear someone say something, anything, while standing at the edge. Nietzsche said that. The Foundation doctor half chuckled, leaning gently with both hands on his cane. Always feels very applicable whenever I come back here. Since 1944, Dr. Ivan Mann had been on more expeditions to the edge than anyone else at the SCP Foundation. 28 years had passed since then. This was his 9th trip. It would also be his last. You get a funny feeling, don't you? The doctor asked, not waiting for the agent to respond. In a way, it was like he wasn't even talking to Friedrichsen. When you look down at it, like you just want to jump, to fall even, if it's just to see if there's anything down there. The call of the void, some people have taken to naming that sensation, comes from a different place depending on who you ask.
I once read a theory that it's an evolutionary trait, passed down from our primate ancestors. Supposedly, it's meant to be our minds predicting if we'll be able to jump for the nearest tree branch. Or it could be a trick of the mind, awareness of being high up, making extra sure where we step, so we don't fall. That in turn makes us think we wanted to. Who knows, eh? Who knows indeed. Agent Friedrichsen didn't have an answer. He just kept staring down at the sheer drop, seeing the waters of the Pacific receding into an endless nothing space. It made the agent feel uneasy, sick, as if his very body was rejecting the idea that he was stood at the precipice of where the world just stopped. There was something else too, another feeling buried beneath the twists and knots of his guts. This was a sad place. The idea that the world would keep on turning and keep having more and more to see, but that there was nothing beyond this place. No more, an end to everything, just the void and its call. The SCP Foundation's research into the phenomenon, now designated as SCP-8001, began when a series of documents were transferred between the Foundation and the Horizon Initiative, a group of interest with a penchant for gathering anomalous artifacts and objects. Led by representatives from the three major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the initiative's goal is to utilize the relics they uncovered to become closer to God and reshape the world in accordance with their combined principles. The Horizon Initiative maintains an amiable relationship with the SCP Foundation, which was what allowed for the transfer of sensitive documents between the two organizations, leading to the discovery of SCP-8001. But before we deep dive into, or rather off the edge of the Flat Earth, I have a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to the insane Flat Earth SCP discovery. This particular piece of evidence that drew the Foundation's attention was a detailed sea chart created by one Boris Kozlov, a Russian seafarer and engineer born in 1845. The chart itself contained a detailed description of a place that, according to all known records, shouldn't have existed, somewhere that couldn't possibly exist. Throughout human history, the existence of SCP-8001 was thought to have been debunked entirely, since the scientific proof for the spherical shape of the Earth has existed since as early as the 5th century BCE, back during the days of ancient Greece. Despite the Earth's circumference being calculated by Eratosthenes back in the 240 BCE, there has long been numerous fringe groups that still believe the erroneous claim that the world is a flat surface. There even exist debunked accounts from historical explorers who claim to have discovered the edge surrounding the circumference of the world. To be clear, the existence of SCP-8001 doesn't disprove the literal centuries worth of well-documented evidence about the shape of the planet. The Earth is, by all scientifically verifiable methods, not flat. So, how can it have an edge? Well, that's precisely the question that the Foundation's own researchers have been seeking to answer since as early as 1942. After learning about SCP-8001 from Boris Kozlov's chart, the Foundation was uncharacteristically unenthusiastic to explore the location for themselves. Given that the location was presumed to not only be remote, but logically couldn't possibly exist, no expeditions would be made to reach SCP-8001 until March of 1942. A vessel belonging to the Foundation was sailing between Panama and Auckland, New Zealand, when it inadvertently entered the waters surrounding SCP-8001. Reports from the ship itself described a lighthouse, its beams shining from an area where there should have been no land, just miles of open ocean. The following year, further exploration revealed no sign of any landmass in the area where the initial sighting had taken place. That was until Boris Kozlov's chart was rediscovered. It had been left in Foundation storage at Site-19 and widely forgotten about. Now, using it as a rough guide to the area, the Foundation was able to conduct more thorough exploration. Before long, in October of 1943, they discovered what should, by all other accounts, something that did not exist: the Tower of Sunset. The numerous writings scattered throughout history from people who ventured unknowingly to SCP-8001 describe being lost at sea, adrift in stormy waters, only to abruptly find themselves discovering a calmer place in the midst of a tempest. An ancient Roman sailor in 45 CE, a Chinese writer from the 4th century CE, and a 13th century vessel from India are among those thought to have inadvertently made their way to SCP-8001. Those are just the misadventures that the Foundation knows about, and there could have well been other expeditions to the edge of the world that predate their own, that simply have no historical record of them. This is widely attributed to these trips out to SCP-8001 ending in shipwreck. In 1944, the SCP Foundation launched 2 individual voyages in order to reach SCP-8001 and verify the existence of any landmass in the area. One of these expeditions, involving Foundation crew aboard the vessel SCPS Rattlesnake, never made it. The last contact from the ship was able to reach a radio station in nearby French Polynesia, but shortly after the Rattlesnake's broadcast, it was never heard from again. The ship was believed to have capsized in the fatal storm before ever reaching SCP-8001. The second of these expeditions, led by Captain Errol Meyer of the SCPS Windswept, was able to navigate through a passageway that took the ship through the shoals near SCP-8001. The vessel was successfully moored at a small island, known as the Isle of Last Watch. Importantly, there is a distinction between this island and SCP-8001 itself. While the numerical designation of SCP-8001 is used to specifically describe the anomalous edge of the world, the surrounding area is referred to as the Isle of Last Watch. This island is now home to SCP Foundation Site-99, as well as the Tower of Sunset, the lighthouse that was seen from a distance by the initial Foundation vessel that passed through the surrounding waters. Venturing onto the Isle of Last Watch, Captain Meyer was accompanied by a Foundation researcher, Dr. Ivan Mann, head of the contingent of anomalous experts present for the successful 1944 expedition. During a thorough sweep of the island, the researchers quickly discovered SCP-8001. Since this discovery, the geological, geographical, and ontological origin of the edge has remained unknown. The very existence of the edge of the world is considered a logical impossibility, although the Foundation has verified the following to be true. SCP-8001 is not an extraplanar space, nor is it a pocket dimension. The research teams that have been stationed at Site-99 since the initial landing in 1944 have been able to communicate and transfer information digitally through the use of satellites in order to make phone calls. The Isle of Last Watch itself does verifiably exist and can be detected through the use of GPS. Rockets and flares have even been launched from the island, and these have remained visible to those close to SCP-8001's locality. The edge itself has been described as a sheer drop, stretching from north to south, situated in the southern Pacific Ocean. Water from the Pacific has been observed flowing freely into a deep void that remains obscured from vision. Attempting to get any closer to SCP-8001, especially by boat, is extremely hazardous. Unless they are following a specifically charted course through the series of nearby shoals that break up the water's flow, it can be very easy for vessels to get swept up by the rapidly moving currents and carried over the edge. However, provided they are able to maneuver safely through the shoals, ships will arrive safely at a sheltered bay on the far reaches of the Isle of Last Watch. Vessels will be able to leave the island by following the same route in reverse in relative safety, provided they keep the correct passageway. Another factor that causes difficulty with venturing close to SCP-8001 is the substantial level of water vapor that the anomalous edge of the world creates. which leads to low visibility and obscures SCP-8001 from observation. While the Isle of Last Watch itself can be viewed from satellites or overhead cameras, including any launched from within the obscured area of SCP-8001 itself, any attempts to observe SCP-8001 closer by sea will inevitably lead to a shipwreck, and trying to do so by air will cause a craft to become lost or have their visibility impaired by the water vapor, likely leading to a crash. According to the Foundation's own containment protocols for SCP-8001, passage beyond SCP-8001 is not currently believed to be survivable. Individuals who pass over SCP-8001 are considered lost. Exploring the Isle of Last Watch, Dr. Mann and Captain Meyer disembarked from the SCPS Windswept onto the island's small bay, on the easternmost part of the landmass. The edge of the island itself consisted of a rocky outcrop rising out of the waters that led to SCP-8001. Cut into these rocks near the bay was a staircase, which the research contingent steadily began to ascend. The northern and central regions of the island mainly consist of flat wooded terrain, with a variety of different plant life growing there, including different types of trees, grasses, and brush not commonly found together. In fact, most were native to continents a considerable distance away from the Isle of Last Watch's location. To the south was a small rocky area that was home to a quiet graveyard. To the west, Captain Meyer observed a narrow outcrop of rock that reached out over the precipice of SCP-8001, with a wooden walkway protruding outward over this outcrop, which could be used to pass over the edge of SCP-8001 without risk of falling. The Tower of Sunset was situated within the flat wooded area in the northern part of the island. Upon closer observation, Dr. Mann and the other researchers were quickly able to determine that the stone structure had been built in multiple conflicting architectural styles. The exterior portions of the tower seemed to be ancient Roman, but throughout the rest of the structure were examples of other influences: 17th century Spain, 5th century China, Britain, the United States, and the Netherlands, with the tower itself being constructed of a mixture of Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and Mesoamerican styles. Dr. Mann surmised that this place had been built gradually, piecemeal, over the course of thousands of years, with every new arrival to the island bringing their own influences as they expanded the structure. The lighthouse itself functions as you would expect, warning vessels of the potential dangers of approaching SCP-8001. It is powered by an 18th century oil lamp and reflector, with an automatic relighting system that seems to, at some point, been upgraded using modern elements to keep the beacon lit and refilling its oil automatically, by timing when it would be running low. The main floor of the Tower of Sunset appears to be a library, containing a repository of texts that seem to have been gathered over several hundred years' worth of exploration. Each of the journals, logs, charts, maps, and diaries contained within the tower are written in a wide variety of languages from across the world, including those that are no longer spoken. Thus far, the Foundation has uncovered texts in the following languages: Latin, French, Greek, Farsi, English, German, Spanish, Chinese, Russian, Korean, Urdu, Portuguese, Amharic, and even a number of writings in pictographic languages, including the Halpul and ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. The oldest piece in the tower's library is a series of Egyptian tales that date back to as early as 2300 BCE. There exists only one modern electronic digital storage device, an early model of Sony-branded MP3 player. Thought to have been manufactured in 2003, this device is secured within a watertight case. However, it remains completely inoperable. It appears to have suffered irreversible water damage, leading to the working theory that it washed up on the shores of the Isle of Last Watch completely by chance. However, when Dr. Mann and Captain Meyer arrived on the island in 1944, they discovered that they weren't the sole inhabitants of the Isle of Last Watch. Beyond just those who have seemingly discovered the island prior to the Foundation, or who have been stranded or marooned there, Last Watch was home to a sentient metal construct, referred to as SCP-8001-A. This automaton, calling itself Ocheli, had seemingly been designed to maintain the lighthouse and its library, and claimed to possess the consciousness of a 16th century French explorer, one of the unfortunate people who had previously been marooned on the island. The construct was operated through a complex combination of clockwork, gears, pistons, and pulleys, which allowed it to move and speak in a way that mimicked human behavior. According to an interview conducted between Dr. Mann and SCP-8001-A, Ocheli had been watching the Tower of Sunset for multiple centuries. It explained that the name of the tower had been recorded in various writings stored in the library. and the Isle of Last Watch was a misinterpretation of the engraving on a headstone in the graveyard. It had been the resting place of a man named Jason of Iolcus and read Tender of the Last Watch. Someone who had arrived to the island believed the headstone to be a nameplate for the island itself. For now, the SCP Foundation is still yet to understand how to gain access to SCP-8001. As for how the Edge of the World came to exist, why the Isle of Last Watch and the Tower of Sunset are located there, these are still questions researchers seek to answer. When Dr. Ivan Mann later returned to the island in 1948, he once again spoke with SCP-8001-A, who told him, "Maybe there is nothing beyond these files, Ivan. Maybe this reality is the end of the story. There are so many who believe that to be true, but perhaps it is not back of the book. Perhaps this is just the turning of the page. Perhaps even here at the edge of the world, there are still stories left to be written." Now check out SCP-2317, The Devourer of Worlds, A Door to Another World, and Parasite Planet, SCP-3003, The End of History, for more.